where we teach and train students, professors, and the general public in apologetics. If you have any questions about this club, where you can find us, how we can meet up, please do not hesitate to ask. And of course, ask for requirements. We need a selfie. Are you ready to smile? All right, ready? 3, 2, 1, smile. All right,
By the way, Anna Kitko is a superstar within Ratio Christi and around this area, so please support her.
Ladies and gentlemen, she does a lot of great work in this area. So, good evening, volunteers. All my sons went to South Carolina. They're all Gamecocks. I know that we all can't be perfect like the volunteers. I get it.
The sanctification process is just further along here.
Yeah, it's further along. The sanctification process is much further along here with the volunteers. All right, well, let's go back to September 29th, 2006. That's when Petty Officer Michael Mansour is a United States Navy SEAL operating in Ramadi, Iraq. And Mansour is standing on a roof in Ramadi, and he's standing in front of a doorway to this roof. He has 2 Navy SEAL teammates lying in the sniper-prone position at his feet. They've already taken AK-47 fire and a rocket-propelled grenade, but they're not exactly sure where the enemy is. There's a bit of a lull in the fighting. Insurgents have blocked off the streets in Ramadi, and there's someone on the loudspeaker in the town mosque yelling, "Kill the Americans!" As Mansour and his team are looking for the next attack, an insurgent from an unknown location throws a grenade up on the roof. It hits Mansour in the chest, and it falls to his feet. Due to the length of the throw, there's no opportunity to pick it up and throw it back. He has only a split second to make a decision. He can leap through the doorway behind him and save himself, but if he does, his 2 teammates lying at his feet will surely die. Mansour yells, "Grenade!" But instead of jumping backward to save himself, he jumps forward chest first onto the grenade. It detonates. 30 minutes later, 25-year-old Michael Mansour is dead. His 2 teammates lying at his feet receive only minor injuries because Mansour's body muffled the blast. One of the survivors said at Mansour's funeral, "Mikey looked death in the face that day and said, 'You will not take my friends, I will go in their stead.'" I've never seen a United States president cry until April of 2008. That's when President George W. Bush invited Mansour's parents into the East Room of the White House to give them their son's Medal of Honor posthumously. The president couldn't even get through the citation without breaking down. Since then, Mansour's high school in Garden Grove, California, built a new stadium. They named it Michael A. Mansour Memorial Stadium. The golden trident insignia that the SEALs wear dominates the 50-yard line. January 2019, North Island, California, just outside of San Diego, the United States Navy commissioned the USS Michael Mansour, the newest guided missile destroyer in the fleet. There's only 3 of these ships in the world. One of them is named after Michael Mansour. This is Mansour's mother, Sally, being escorted onto the ship, named in honor of her fallen son. Now, why did they do this? Because Michael Mansour literally sacrificed himself to save his friends. There's no greater love than to sacrifice yourself to save your friends, said Jesus of Nazareth before he went to the cross. Michael Mansour sacrificed himself to save his friends. The question is, would anyone sacrifice himself to save you? And the answer is, someone already has. His name is Jesus of Nazareth. But of course, in today's culture, a lot of people don't think the story's true. They think it's invented. After all, it was written down by religious people. We know religious people can tend to embellish things. And it's got miracles in it, like a resurrection. How many people in this room have ever seen someone rise from the dead after you knew they were dead for at least 36 hours? Yeah, none of us. Why? Because it doesn't happen. Yet if you're a Christian, you have to believe something none of us have ever seen. How rational is that? Well, I actually think it's quite easy to show that Christianity is true. You only need to answer 4 questions. In other words, if you investigate these 4 questions, I think you'll realize that the answer to these 4 questions is yes. And if the answer to these 4 questions is yes, then Christianity is true. Not just true for me, not just true for you, but true like gravity's true. What are the 4 questions? Here are the 4 questions. That is some pretty grooving music, isn't it? Yeah. That's actually from our TV show, which is on tonight, Wednesday nights. I better get home to the studio. 9 p.m. On DirecTV channel 378. If you don't have DirecTV, it's on Roku. And if you don't have Roku, it's on this new technology sweeping Knoxville right now. It's called the internet. Have you guys heard of this? Yeah, if you go to our website right here, crossexamined.org, at that time you can watch the show. We're also on radio, a bunch of stations around the country, but doesn't matter if it's on radio. It's a podcast. It's called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist podcast. We do 2 a week. What we do is we present evidence for Christianity, and we cross-examine ideas against it. Now, why are these the 4 questions? Truth, God, miracles, and the New Testament. By the way, before I go to get into this, do you guys know who this city's named after? Who's it named after? Henry Knox. Do you know what Henry Knox did during the Revolution? Henry Knox got guns from Ticonderoga and dragged them for 56 days from Ticonderoga all the way to Boston. He somehow got 60 tons of equipment and ammunition from there to Boston. And once they got to Boston, they set these guns up over Boston, and the Brits looked up and said, "Where did those guns come from?" And the Brits had to evacuate Boston because of Henry Knox. Henry Knox was a hero, and that's why this city's named after him. I think that's almost a miracle, not technically. But how do you, from December of 1775 to January of 1776, how do you get 60 tons worth of equipment and ammunition? How do you drag it 300 miles without really there being a lot of roads? Through ice? He went across some lakes, and the ice wasn't strong enough, and the stuff went into the lake, and he figured out how to get it out. I mean, the guy was amazing. All right, no extra charge for that. Let's go back to this. Truth, God, miracles, New Testament. Why are these the 4 questions? First question, does truth exist? Why is that important? Well, you hear people saying there's no truth. You got your truth, I got my truth. All truth is relative. Look, if there's no truth, Christianity can't be true. Of course, if there's no truth, atheism can't be true either. Now, of course, there's truth, ladies and gentlemen. Would you be going to UT if there wasn't truth? I mean, what are you here to learn? Truth, right? I mean, would you ever read a book if there was no truth? Would you ever be able to catch someone in a lie if there was no truth? No, lies presuppose truth, right? So we're going to deal with that first. Second question, does God exist? Christianity can't be true if there's no God. I hope to show you tonight from about 30,000 feet that God exists, and we're not going to quote the Bible to do that. You don't need the Bible to know that God exists. You can show that God exists just by looking around, and that's what we're going to do. People knew there was a God long before there was any Bible or any kind of religious writing. Are miracles possible? I just asked you if anyone's seen a resurrection. Nobody said yes, but I hope to show you tonight that not only are miracles possible, but the greatest miracle in the Bible, even atheists are admitting the evidence for. We'll see that tonight. Then we're going to get to the key question, is the New Testament true? The New Testament doesn't have a prayer if there's no truth, no God, or no miracles, but if truth exists, God exists, and miracles are possible, then we can see if these documents have enough reliable information in them and evidence from outside these documents to let us know that one event from the ancient world took place. If this event took place, Christianity's true. If it didn't take place, it's false. What's the event? The resurrection. If Jesus really rose from the dead, game over, Christianity's true. If Jesus didn't rise from the dead, game over, it's false. In fact, Paul, writing to the church at Corinth, said, if Christ hasn't risen from the dead, your faith is in vain. Do you realize that Christianity is a worldview you can investigate and discover whether or not it's true? It's not just someone's philosophy. You can see if there's evidence that this happened. So that's what we're going to do. Now, from this point, after you show the New Testament's telling the truth about the resurrection, it's pretty easy to show the Bible's the Word of God. We won't have time to get into that tonight. After we do this, we're going to get to your questions. I think Anna said we're going to do Q&A. That's actually not true. I think we're going to do all Q, no A. All right? Everyone going to ask a question takes all the pressure off me. All right? Now, we're going to do questions later, but we're going to start right here. Does truth exist? Volunteers, you ready to go? Come on, volunteers, you ready to go? Yeah. All right. Now, whenever you start talking about truth, you always have to start with Jack Nicholson. Right? Because Tom Cruise had him on the witness stand, and he said to him, Colonel, I want the truth. And Nicholson said, you can't handle the truth. Volunteers, that was pretty weak. You know, the Gamecocks did it better. All right? I'm just telling you. Because if he said it that way, the movie would have gone nowhere. You can't handle it. That's not how he said it. Here's how he said it.
You can't handle the truth.
All right, let's try it again. I want the truth.
You can't handle the truth.
Now that felt better, didn't it? Didn't you always want to do that with some professor up here, right? You can't handle the truth. Well, you know, there's a lot of people that can't handle the truth. They're saying, you got your truth, I got my truth, all truth is relative. Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't get anything outside of what we talk about here tonight, what we're going to talk about in the next 5 minutes, for me anyway, is the most important thinking skill I've ever learned. And to show you what a dimwit I was 33 years old. I already had a master's degree, and I did not know what I'm about to show you right now. And you know why I didn't know it? I never had a course in logic. I had to go to seminary to get a course in logic. How many people in here have had a real course in logic? Can I see your hands, please? All right, see these people with their hands up? These are the homeschoolers. There they are. There they are, right there, right? That's right. We don't teach logic in public school. If we did, things would be a lot better. Instead of teaching young people how to think, we're teaching them what to feel. And that's dangerous. Why? Because if you follow your feelings without reason or without moral restraint, you're going to wind up in a very dark place. So what we're going to talk about is one fundamental law of logic. You intuitively know this law, but sometimes you forget it. The law of logic is called the law of non-contradiction. And it says that opposite ideas cannot both be true at the same time and in the same sense. For example, we can't both be at UT and not at UT at the same time and in the same sense. It's one or the other, but not both, right? Either God exists or he doesn't exist, but not both. You with me? All right. We're going to apply this law of non-contradiction to the relativistic and postmodernist claims of our time. This is probably the clearest postmodern relativistic claim you might ever hear. It's, there is no truth. Now, if someone were to say this to you, there is no truth, you should ask that person a question. What should the question be? Is that true? Is it true that there's no truth? Because if it's true that there's no truth, the claim there is no truth can't be true, but it claims to be true. Did I say that right? I know that can give you intellectual constipation if you think about it long enough, because this is a self-defeating statement. What's a self-defeating statement? A self-defeating statement violates the law of non-contradiction. If this statement is true, it's false, right? Because it claims to be true at the same time it claims there are no truths. It would be like if I said, I can't speak a word in English. What would you say to me? Hey, Frank, you're using English to say it. Now, here's the thinking skill you got to get good at using. What you got to get good at doing is turning the claim on itself. Turning the claim on itself. So when somebody says there's no truth, you turn the claim on itself and you ask, is that true? Now, you're not being unkind when you're doing this because you're not making statements. You're asking questions, right? Somebody says there's no truth. You ask, is that true? Let's do a few more of these. They're all going to start with, is that or isn't that, okay? So how about this one? You hear people saying there's no such thing as absolute truth. If someone were to say that to you, what question might you ask back? Turn the claim on itself. Go ahead. Is that an absolute truth? Or isn't that an absolute truth? Or are you absolutely sure? Can everyone see this is an absolute truth claim that claims there are no absolute truths? It's like saying I can't speak a word in English. Or it's like saying my parents had no kids that lived. Or it's like saying my brother is an only child. All right? These are self-defeating statements, and you got to get good at recognizing them. Now, it's not said this way much anymore. In our culture, it's more said or at least intimated this way. There isn't the truth, only my truth. You know, you have your truth, I have my truth, you live your truth, I'll live my truth, we'll all get along. Just sounds so right, doesn't it? It sounds like we all ought to believe this. It sounds so Oprah, doesn't it? Yeah, there's just one big problem with it. It violates the law of non-contradiction. Why? Because if somebody says there isn't the truth, only my truth, if you turn the claim on itself, you can ask, is that just your truth or the truth? In other words, is the statement on top just your truth? Well, if it is, if it's just your opinion, okay, fine, but why should I believe it? However, if you're saying the statement on top is the truth, can everyone see the first half of the statement says there aren't any the truths? Can everybody see this is a the truth statement, claiming there are no the truth statements? It defeats itself. I know it's very unpopular in our culture to say this, particularly on a college campus, but I got to say it anyway. There's no such thing as your truth. There's no such thing as my truth. There's just the truth. I mean, if you want to say you have your own truth, you might as well say, I have my own math. I mean, imagine if Anna asked me, imagine if you said, hey, Frank, can you hang around UT an extra day? We've got a lot of work to do around here. In fact, if you stay an extra day, you just tell me how many hours you work at the end of the day. I'll pay you $10 an hour. You just tell me how much you worked, and I'll pay you. Now, actually, Anna would never do this. She doesn't pay that much. All right. But let's say I did that, and tomorrow I stayed, and I worked dawn to dusk here on campus. I worked 15 hours, and she said, okay, what do I owe you? And I go, okay. 15 hours times $10 an hour, you owe me $150,000. She's going to say $150,000. No, I owe you $150,000. And I go, oh, no, you don't understand. I have my own math. She's going to say you're crazy. There's not my math or your math. There's just math. Now, parents, I'm not talking about the kind of math your kid brings home and you go, hey, this isn't my math. I'm not talking about that, okay? What I'm saying here is there's one answer to a math problem. It's not my answer or your answer. It's the answer. And that's the way truth works. We don't just invent our own truths. If something's true, it's true for all people at all times in all places when referring to you at that time. Okay? That's what truth is. It corresponds to reality. Now, how about this? This is a big one in our culture. You ought not judge. In fact, if you're a Christian, people are going to say, Jesus said don't judge. Why are you judging, you hypocrites? All right, put Jesus aside for just a second. What's the problem with the claim logically? If somebody says you ought not judge, what question are you going to ask back? Yeah, hey, isn't that a judgment? Or if they say you ought not judge, you might want to ask them, then why are you judging me for judging? You see that's a judgment right there? You say, well, wait a minute, Frank, didn't Jesus say don't judge? Nope, never said it. Sure he did. He said it in Matthew chapter 7, verse 1. This is in the middle of his most famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount. All right, I know this is going to sound odd for just a second, but stick with me, it's true. There are no verses in the Bible. There are no verses in the Bible. Do you think when Matthew was writing his biography that we now call a gospel, when he got to this point, he said, here's chapter 7, verse 1? No. When were the chapter and verse divisions added? About 500 years ago to help us navigate the text, which is really important because you really need numbers to find your way around this big book. I mean, if you're a Christian, imagine you had a big book, a Bible with no numbers in it, and your pastor didn't have numbers in his Bible either, and every Sunday morning he just got up and he opened this big book and he looked at you and he went, let's go about 2/3 of the way in, let's see if we can find the same spot. Like, no, you couldn't do that, right? You need numbers to help you find your way around. The problem is we tend to think if it's got a number in front of it, we can take it out and make it say whatever we want, devoid of its context. You can't do that, ladies and gentlemen. You got to figure out what it's about. Now, some of you are going to hate me for this, but I don't care. I'm leaving in the morning, all right? This is why you should never say Jeremiah 29:11 is a promise to you. What's Jeremiah 20? You know Jeremiah 29:11 if you're a Christian. Oh, the plans I have for you, plans to give you hope in the future, plans to prosper you. Is this a promise to 21st century Christians living in Knoxville, Tennessee? Who's that a promise to in context? Yeah, that's a promise to the exiles who were forcibly taken out of Judah in 586 BC by the Babylonian dictator Nebuchadnezzar. He came, destroyed the city, destroyed the temple, took those people all the way to Babylon, modern day Iraq, and God, through the prophet Jeremiah, was telling those people, promising those people, that 70 years later, he was going to bring them back into the land and prosper them. And it happened in 516 BC. They went back into the land and began to rebuild the temple. But it's not a promise to us today. In fact, when people say, I'm claiming Jeremiah 29:11 as a promise to me, I say, why don't you claim Jeremiah 44:11 as a promise to you? What's Jeremiah 44:11? Jeremiah 44:11 is the promise God made to the exiles that went to Egypt. And he warned them, don't go to Egypt. You know what Jeremiah 44:11 says? It says, I will destroy you and all Judah. You don't see that stitched into a pillow. You don't see that on a coffee mug. You don't see that on a birthday card, happy birthday. I will destroy you and all Judah. That is so sweet, Grandma. Thank you so much. No, we're taking stuff out of context. Ladies and gentlemen, whether you're a Christian, atheist, anywhere in between, the Bible is not a book of Chinese fortunes. You don't just open it up and point to a verse and go, that verse is for me. You got to figure out what the context is. The same thing is true in Matthew chapter 7, verse 1. Does Jesus say, judge not, and he stops right there? No, what does he say? Judge not, lest you be judged. By the same standard you judge others, you be judged by that standard. So before you try and take the speck out of your brother's eye, you hypocrite. Notice you hypocrite is a judgment. Notice that? Take the log out of your own eye first, then you'll be better able to help your brother. Then he goes on to talk about don't cast your pearls before swine, which requires a whole other series of judgments. Is Jesus telling us not to make judgments here? No, he's telling us to take the speck out of our brother's eye. He's simply saying, get that problem out of your life first so you can better help your brother. So this is not a command not to judge. It's actually a command on how to judge. In other words, don't judge hypocritically. If you've got that problem, fix it, then go help your brother. But it would be completely ridiculous to say don't make judgments. Why? Number one, it's a judgment itself. Number two, you'd be dead already if you didn't make judgments. You made 100 judgments tonight just getting over here. And now you're going, this was a bad judgment. This guy's crazy. What are we talking about here? Come on. In fact, Jesus says in John 7:24, he says, stop judging by mere appearances and make a right judgment. You have to make a judgment whether you're going to be a Christian or an atheist, right? Or whatever. In fact, atheists make judgments. They judge there's no God. Jesus didn't rise from the dead. Bible's not telling the truth. There is no objective meaning or purpose to life. When you die, you're just going to become worm food. It's hopeless. Have a nice day. These are all judgments. The only question is, are your judgments true? I will say this, however. Jesus did save a very stern rebuke for people who were judgmental. And who were the judgmental ones in his day? Pharisees. And who were the Pharisees? What was their job? What did they do? They were the religious and political leaders of Israel. Some of them were on the Sanhedrin, a lawmaking, judging body. They were politicians. And Jesus went after these people. Are you telling me Jesus got involved in politics? Yes! And he wasn't so nice doing it. In fact, if you think Jesus was a sweet guy who's never said a bad word about anyone, you have not read John chapter 2, John chapter 8, or Matthew chapter 23. What happens in John chapter 2? Jesus makes a whip, and he goes and he jacks people up in the temple. Sweet and gentle Jesus did this? Yes! And then in John chapter 8, he's having an argument with these Pharisee politicians. He's right in the middle of an argument with them when he says, your father is the devil. Jesus, you can't say that. That's not very Christ-like. Excuse me, I am Christ? Can you imagine you're having an argument with somebody and you stop right in the middle and you go, your father is the devil. Never try that with a sibling, by the way. And then in Matthew 23, Jesus really unloads on these Pharisee politicians. He says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Oh, you look great on the outside. You're whitewashed tombs. But on the inside, you're full of dead men's bones. You go a mile to make a convert, and then once you make them a convert, you make them twice as much a son of hell as you are. How will you avoid being condemned to hell? What? Sweet and gentle Jesus said this? Yes. Jesus was not Barney. Can't we all get along, boys and girls? No! I came to bring a sword. It's going to divide mother and daughter, father and son. How often have you heard those passages talked about? But some of you in this room and some of you watching out there know those passages are true because you're divided in your own home over Jesus. And you should be. If Jesus is God, and he is, then you ought to be following Jesus. Not what your family says, not what your culture says, not what Fox News says or MSNBC says or social media says. You ought to be following what Jesus says. By the way, this idea that Jesus was a wimp, I don't know where we get that idea from. Why did they kill Jesus? Well, number one, he claimed to be God. That was blasphemy to the Jews and sedition to the Romans. And secondly, he annoyed a lot of powerful people like Caiaphas, the high priest. Caiaphas, I think, knew Jesus was the Messiah. Why? Because as soon as he raises Lazarus from the dead, what does Caiaphas want to do? He wants to kill both Lazarus and Jesus. And he says, it's better that one innocent man die than the whole nation perish. Caiaphas didn't want to lose his job. Look, if Jesus is the Messiah, you don't need a temple anymore. In fact, where is the temple right now? Yeah, look at the person next to you. If that person's a Christian, there's the temple. We're all individual temples now. But Caiaphas knew the gig was up if Jesus was the Messiah. Jesus was tough. And he tried to suppress the truth, did Caiaphas. In fact, when you tell somebody something that's true and they get annoyed with you, you just help convict them. As Augustine said, we love the truth when it enlightens us. We hate the truth when it convicts us. A few military people in here, and by the way, I was in the Navy for 8 years, which stands for never again volunteer yourself. A few military people in here, you always get more flack when you're over the target. If you tell somebody something that's true and they're shooting back at you, you're over the target. They don't want their evil deeds exposed. Jesus said, men love darkness rather than light. So we have to make judgments, but we have to make judgments without being judgmental. Do you know there's nobody in this room, there's nobody watching out there on the internet that's going to make it to God because you're better than anybody else. We're all fallen. The only way we're going to make it to God is when God comes to save us, and that's what Jesus did. We rely on his work, not our own. That's why we can't be judgmental about certain things. In fact, somebody put it this way: evangelism is just one beggar showing another beggar where the food is. That's what we're trying to do. Now, there's many more self-defeating statements. We don't have time to get into them. We got to move on. But I want to summarize this whole section this way. Can everybody see this statement right here shoots itself? Can everybody see that? That relativism and postmodernism are false because they claim it's true that there is no truth. Now, tragically, most of our high schools and nearly all of our universities have bought into postmodernism. The truth that there's no truth. How does it make any sense to pay some professor $50,000 a year to tell you the truth there's no truth? Now, I don't think this happens in the engineering department. In fact, Chad and I were talking earlier, right? You just can't build a bridge any way you want, right? I got my truth on how to build a bridge. No! All right? Impossible. In fact, as we do this quite a bit, this is a picture of an event we did at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. And they love the Bible there about as much as the University of California at Berkeley does. And we have the mic set up. We'll have the mic set up later here. And I ask people who are not Christians sometimes a question. And it's not fair for me to do that unless I tell you what the question is in advance so you can think about it. Here's the question I might ask you. The question is, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? I've had atheists and other non-believers stand at that microphone in front of hundreds of people and say, no. No? Wait, I thought you claimed to be reasonable. I thought you claimed to be rational. How is it you wouldn't believe something that turned out to be true? It's not a matter of the head. It's a matter of the heart. They don't want it to be true. They don't want there to be a God. They want to be God over their own lives. They're not on a truth quest. They're on a happiness quest. And they're just going to believe whatever they think is going to make them happy. Now, here's the problem. You can make yourself happy over the short term, doing a lot of fun, but ultimately sinful and selfish things. Yet over the long term, it's a disaster. And everyone in this room over 40 years old knows what I'm talking about because many of us have tried it ourselves, right? I'm going to live my way. I'm going to do things my way. I'm going to do what I want to do, when I want to do it, with whom I want to do it. No, you're not. not very long. If you try it very long, what's going to happen to your relationships? Who's going to put up with a me monster like that? Life's all about you. No, if you live totally for yourself, sorry, I can almost guarantee your future. You're going to wind up divorced, addicted, broken, alone, and probably prematurely dead. If you want contentment, you got to go straight through truth, and Jesus is the truth. So always ask people, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? By the way, a non-believer could ask you, hey, if atheism true, would you become an atheist? Got to ask yourself that question. Are we believing stuff just because we want to? Or are we believing stuff because there's evidence for what we believe? The Bible actually tells us that we ought to get evidence for what we believe, and reason makes sense that we ought to get evidence for what. I mean, why? Christians, why should you be a Christian and not a Muslim? Why should you be a Christian and not a Buddhist or a Hindu? Or make up your own religion, as many people do. The reason you ought to be a Christian is because it's true. Not because it's convenient, but because it's true. So we know that truth exists. The next question, is it true that God exists? And we're just going to look at 30,000 feet at 3 arguments for the existence of God. Normally I spend a lot of time on this, but Ann and I were talking, and it seems like atheism is not as big of an issue as it was, say, 10 years ago. People are more interested in, okay, what really is true? I think there's some kind of power out there, but what is the true power? So we're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but a little bit. Here are the 3 arguments that we spent a lot of time on in the book. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. The first argument is from the beginning of the universe, known as the cosmological argument. Cosmological comes from the Greek word cosmos, which means world or universe. And it says that the universe had a beginning, it must have had a beginner. The second argument is the argument from design, known as the teleological argument. Telos is a Greek word meaning design or purpose. And it says if there's design in the universe and design in life, there has to be a designer. Now, these 2 arguments have some scientific evidence behind them. The third argument doesn't have any science behind it. It's more philosophical in nature. Yet it's the argument you intuitively understood from the time you were a relatively small child. It's the argument from morality known as the moral argument. And it says if there's one thing morally wrong out there, just one, like it's wrong to torture babies for fun, or it's wrong to murder 6 million people in a Holocaust, or it's wrong to rape, then there has to be a God. Why? Because if there is no standard beyond humanity that we're obligated to obey, everything's just a matter of opinion. That's just your opinion against the baby torturer's opinion, or your opinion against, say, Hitler's opinion, or your opinion against a rapist's opinion. We know these issues aren't just a matter of opinion. It's really wrong to murder people or to rape them. If that's the case, there must be this external standard of righteousness that we're all obligated to obey. That standard can only exist if God exists. Now, we'll get to that later. We got to start here, the cosmological argument. Come on. You got to admit it was worth coming here tonight just to see God do that. Did you see that? A lot of people say, I've never seen God move. Oh, really? Check this out. Now, this is the argument that many say points back to the big. Now, I know there's some people in here going, Frank, we're Christians in here, and we don't believe in the Big Bang. You guys don't believe in the Big Bang? I believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. In fact, the evidence for the Big Bang is so good that even atheistic scientists have admitted it. Stephen Hawking, who was probably the top physicist in the world until he died about 7 years ago, despite being an atheist, said this: almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. Now, Hawking tried to come up with another explanation other than God. He failed, but he's admitting the evidence. Now, I could show you the evidence, and I could show you other experts talking about this, but we don't have time for that. It's all in the book, chapter 3. And you know what? It's not even controversial. What is controversial is not that the universe had a beginning. What is controversial is what caused the universe to have a beginning. I'll just give you my perspective. Tell me if you think this makes sense. If space-time and matter had a beginning, which it did, whatever created space-time and matter must transcend space-time and matter. In other words, the cause must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful to create the universe out of nothing, personal in order to choose to create. Why? Because to go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, someone had to make a choice, and only persons can make choices. Also, the cause would have to be intelligent, to have a mind to make a choice. Now, ladies and gentlemen, when you think about a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, who do you think of? You say God. Well, how do we know it's the Christian God, Frank? We don't. Yet. I mean, this could be Allah or some other theistic or deistic God. There is no scientific argument that's going to get you all the way to Jesus. You need historical evidence, which we'll get to a little bit later about Jesus. But we do have six attributes of what could be the God of the Bible. And when we look at the evidence for Jesus, I think we're going to be able to conclude that the same being that walked out of the tomb 1,992 years ago last Sunday is the same being in whose divine nature created the universe out of nothing. We haven't gotten there yet, but we have six attributes of a being that could be God. Now, there's a whole chapter on this in the book, but we got to move on to the next argument, the design argument. There are two aspects of this argument. The universe appears to be designed, and you appear to be designed, life. We don't have time to go into a lot of detail. I want to show you one aspect of the universe being designed called fine-tuning. Scientists have discovered in recent decades, since pretty much the 50s, that our universe is balanced on a razor's edge. That if you were to change any one of a number of factors about our universe virtually imperceptibly, either the universe or our solar system, we couldn't exist. There are dozens of these. I'm just going to give you one. And to show you how precise this is, let's take a look at the gravitational force. If the gravitational force were altered by more than 1 part in 10 to the 40th power compared to the strong nuclear force, we would not exist. Now, what's 1 part in 10 to the 40th power? That's 1 part in 1 with 40 zeros following it. You say, Frank, I can't get my head around that number. I know, neither can I. So let me give you an illustration. Take the entire North American continent from Central America all the way to Greenland, the 51st state, and stack it in dimes all the way to the moon, 238,000 miles. And do that on 1 billion other North American continents. And then take all those billion piles of dimes, put them in one humongous pile, mark one dime red, mix it in, blindfold a friend, throw him on that pile, ask him to pick one dime at random. The chance he would pick that one red marked dime is 1 chance in 10 to the 40th power. Is he going to pick that dime? No. Look, there's only 2 explanations for this value being where it is. It was either designed to be there or it wasn't. What makes more sense? Somebody designed it. Now you can see why people like Richard Dawkins and the late Christopher Hitchens said this was the hardest argument to answer as an atheist. How do you come at and this is just one of dozens of these. Not only that, you are designed. You are even more amazing than you think you are. In fact, this is you in the womb at 11 weeks. Question, is this animal, mineral, vegetable, or human? In fact, let's go back earlier than 11 weeks. Let's go all the way back to when your mother and your father got together to conceive you. Have you guys had this talk before? I see some young people in here, so I'll try and be discreet. I also see some older people in here, so I'll try and be discreet as well, just in case you've forgotten how this works. When your mother and your father got together to conceive you, your mother unconsciously perfumed her egg to attract your father, and then your father sent the entire population of the United States, 300 million soldiers, toward your mother's egg. And then there was a race, and you won. Don't let anyone ever tell you you're not special. You beat out 300 million others. You have blown away anything Michael Phelps has done. Now, seeing some of you limp in here earlier makes it hard for me to believe you were the fastest soldier in the gene pool, but you were. Now, your soldier was 20 to 30 times smaller than a grain of salt, yet it contained half of the 3.2 billion letter software program, your DNA, that makes you, all the letters in the right order. And your mother's egg was about the size of a period at the end of a sentence in an average book, and it contained the other half of the 3.2 billion letter software program, your DNA. And when your soldier and your egg came together, a new 100% genetic human being was created. You know you have not received any more genetic information from this point till right now? Your genetic information has just duplicated itself. In fact, there were only 4 things that separated you from adulthood: time, air, water, and food. Those are the same 4 things that separate a 2-year-old from adulthood. Does this have implications on the abortion issue? Yeah, I think it does. We don't kill the 2-year-old. Why do we kill the unborn child in the womb? Genetically, it's the same. You say, wait a minute, Frank, come on, you can't legislate morality. All right, no extra charge for this, friends. This was the subject of our first book, creatively titled Legislating Morality. All laws legislate morality. Every law declares one behavior right and the opposite behavior wrong. You can't think of a law that doesn't legislate morality. The only question is, whose morality will we legislate? And when people say, don't legislate or don't impose your morality on me, I say, why not? Would that be immoral? Because you know what? You're imposing your morality on me right now. You're saying I ought not impose ought nots, yet you're imposing that ought not on me. Why do you get to impose ought nots, but I don't? Actually, the better answer of this is this. If somebody says, don't impose your morality on me, I think you ought to say, this isn't my morality. I didn't make this stuff up. I didn't make up the fact that murder's wrong, that abortion's wrong, that rape is wrong, that men were made for women and women were made for men, and the best way to perpetuate and stabilize society, which is the reason the government's involved in marriage to begin with, is to legally recognize that man-woman relationship over every other relationship. I didn't make any of this stuff up. I didn't make up the fact it's wrong to mutilate the genitalia of children. This isn't my morality. This just happens to be the morality. I don't want to legislate my morality. I don't want to legislate your morality. I want to legislate the morality. The one Thomas Jefferson said was self-evident. The one the Apostle Paul said, the Gentiles are not of the law written on their hearts. Look, if you've got a problem with the morality, you don't have a problem with me. I didn't make it up. You have a problem with the Creator upon whose nature this morality is derived. All right, no extra charge for that. Let's go back to this. From this point until right now, a construction project of astonishing complexity began taking place. Cells began multiplying at a rate of 4,000 cells per second. Brain cells began multiplying at a rate of 100,000 cells per second. For most of you, anyway. Some cells became heart cells, others lung cells, others brain cells. How did they know how to do this? Nobody knows. Some cells went so far across you to become what they needed to become that it would be equivalent to you today walking across the United States alone. And that construction project continues to this very moment. You just made 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another. Knock it off. I mean, are you thinking about this? Are you going, wait a minute, Frank, I got to concentrate. New red blood cells coming up. How is this happening? Well, Aristotle noticed something 2,400 years ago. Of course, he didn't know anything about blood cells, but he did notice that all of nature is going in a direction. For example, do you ever notice that if you properly nourish an acorn, it always goes in the direction of becoming an oak tree? Why doesn't it become an elm tree or a birch tree or a seahorse? You say, well, it's programmed to become an oak tree. Well, who programmed it? And by the way, is an acorn conscious? Is an acorn in the ground thinking, all right, what do I have to do to become an oak tree? No. But it reliably goes in the direction of becoming an oak tree. If it doesn't have a mind of its own, and it doesn't, yet it reliably goes in a direction, there must be an external mind directing it toward an end. That's what Aristotle called the unmoved mover. Thomas Aquinas came along in the 1200s AD and he said, this is going to be my 5th way to argue for God, that all of nature's going in a direction, so there must be someone directing it. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is not a Big Bang cause. It's not a historical cause. This is a cause right now. Every single second the universe exists, it's being directed by a mind. And the Bible even talks about this. In him we live and move and have our being. Christ holds all things together. The writer of Hebrews says, God sustains all things by his powerful word. In other words, God is to the universe what a band is to music. If a band were up here playing music, the band would be creating and sustaining the music. What would happen to the music the second the band stopped playing? Music would be over. Same thing is true with God. God creates the universe, the natural laws that govern it, and he sustains the universe and the natural laws that govern it. And he creates you and sustains you. If he were to pull his hand away, we'd go out of existence immediately. By the way, this is why we can do science, ladies and gentlemen. You always hear people saying, oh, science has gotten rid of the need for God. Nonsense. Science would be impossible unless there was order in the universe. Unless we had these persistent and consistent natural laws that did the same thing over and over again. How do you explain those? You explain them by saying there's a mind behind all this. Now, there's more in the book, but we got to go to our final God argument, the moral argument. And we could spend an hour on this, but we're going to spend about 6 minutes on it. And probably the best way of looking at the moral argument is to talk football. All right, ladies and gentlemen, how do you know that when Patrick Mahomes threw that pick six in the Super Bowl, that was a bad play for Kansas City? How did you know that? And how did you know that later when he threw a touchdown pass, that was a good play for Kansas City? Not just the rules. What do you have to know? Not just the result. The point, when people start screaming. The purpose, right? You got to know the purpose of the game. If you know the purpose of the game, then you can say the pick six, that takes us further away from the purpose, so that's a bad play. But the touchdown he threw, that gets us closer to the purpose, that's a good play. If there's no purpose, all you can say is the plays were different. You can't say they're good or bad. Now notice in football that the purpose of the game comes from outside the game. When they showed up to play the Super Bowl, or right next door to us right now, when the Volunteers play, when they show up, they don't make up the purpose, right? They don't make up the rules. Who makes up the, well, here it'd be the NC2A makes up the purpose and the rules, right? And every once in a while, they'll alter the rules a little bit. Why? Because they can, because football's an arbitrary game. The rules can be different. But in life, the same thing happens. The purpose and the rules come from outside the game, but they're not arbitrary because they're derived from the nature of God himself. If there is no God, there's no purpose, and if there is no purpose, there's not a right way to live life or a wrong way to live life. They're just different. Now, I don't know if you've noticed this, but in the past 10 years or so ago, or past 10, easy for me to say, in the past 10 years or so, our country seems to be creating rights about every 10 minutes. But do you realize that a lot of the people saying they have certain rights are atheists? And do you realize if there is no God, there are no rights? That everything's just a matter of opinion? It's just your opinion against somebody else's opinion? Look, not only is there no right to abortion if there's no God, there's no right to life. Not only is there no right to same-sex marriage, there's no right to natural marriage. Not only are there no trans rights, there are no children's rights or women's rights or human rights or Christian rights. There's no rights of any kind. Everything is just a matter of opinion. Now, we all intuitively know that's nonsense, which means that God does exist. In fact, one of the greatest objections to Christianity, that if you're a Christian, you might hear this almost once a week. You're a hypocrite, right? Now, when somebody says you're a hypocrite, you know what I think you ought to say? You're right. So, what does that prove? Do you realize that everybody's a hypocrite? Do you know anybody that lives perfectly up to their own standards? Nobody does. What's the point? When somebody says you're a hypocrite, you ought to agree with them. I am. And then ask, so? And I might also say, you know what you've just done? You've just given evidence for God. Why? Why is hypocrisy wrong if there is no God? Everything's just a matter of opinion anyway. Now, I know there's a lot of people in this room and a lot of people watching out there that have experienced church hurt. And that's very lamentable. But I want to ask you a question about that. And it's this. When somebody plays Beethoven poorly, who do you blame? Who do you blame? Yeah, you don't blame Beethoven. So when somebody plays Jesus poorly, you don't blame Jesus. Look, just because I'm not true and beautiful doesn't mean Jesus isn't true and beautiful. Newsflash, Christianity is not Christians. Christianity is Jesus. Keep your eyes on Jesus. You know, you ought to expect Christians to let you down. Why? Because we're all fallen. We all need a Savior. In fact, back in 2008, 2009, I had a couple of debates with Christopher Hitchens. You guys remember Christopher Hitchens? He was a brilliant British atheist who sounded more brilliant than he was because he had a British accent. And you can see these debates on our YouTube channel. Christopher wrote the book, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. And a lot of what he says in the book is true. Religious people have done a lot of evil things. But I kept asking him, what's your standard of good for you to even know what evil was? Because if there is no God, nothing's right or wrong, which means there is no evil or no good. In fact, Richard Dawkins famously said, in a universe full of blind replication, there is no good or evil. There is no justice. We just dance to our DNA. And if that's true, if we are just moist robots, as the atheists say, we don't have free will, every decision we make is completely determined by the laws of physics, then there's nothing right or wrong, nothing good or bad. Things just are. So at one point I turned to Christopher and I said, Christopher, you know, you're right, I'm a hypocrite. I can't live up to what Jesus told me to live up to. But if I could, I wouldn't need him. I wouldn't need a Savior if I was perfect. And when people say I can't go to church because there's too many hypocrites down there, I always say, come on down, pal, we got room for one more. Look, the church is a hospital for sinners. It's not a country club for saints. To say you can't go to church because there's too many hypocrites down there is like saying I can't go to the gym because there's too many out-of-shape people down there. That's one of the reasons they're at the gym, to get in shape. And one of the reasons you go to church is to get into moral shape. It's not the only reason. But don't let hypocrites blur Jesus. Jesus is the Savior, not your Christian friend or your overbearing uncle or your hypocritical father who said he was a Christian but treated you like dirt. And by the way, religion doesn't poison everything. Everything poisons religion. I poison religion because I don't live up to the pure words of Christ. But again, if I did, I wouldn't need him. Now, we could talk about the moral argument a lot. We don't have time. Let's just sum up where we've been. From these three arguments, for say the cosmological argument, we can see we have a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause. From the teleological argument, we get more information that this being is intelligent. We also see he's sustaining the universe. And from the moral argument, we can see that this being is also morally perfect. So from these three arguments, we get a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created all things and sustains all things to this very moment. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the God of biblical Christianity, and we haven't even opened the Bible yet. This is called natural theology. You don't need any religious work to know that God exists. In fact, if someone were to ask you, if you're a Christian, why do you think God exists? I think you ought to say this: I know God by his effects. In other words, I'm reasoning from effect to cause. If there's a creation, that's the effect. I'm reasoning back to a cause, a creator. If there's design in the universe and design in life, that's the effect. I'm reasoning back to a cause, a designer. If there's a moral law written on the heart, that's the effect. I'm reasoning back to a cause, a moral lawgiver. If I have a brain that can ascertain truths outside of my skull and I can figure out what's going on out there in the world, that's the effect. Then I'm reasoning back to who could create a brain or a mind like this? Only a great mind. If there's evidence that a man predicted and accomplished his own resurrection from the dead, that's the effect. I'm reasoning back, who could do that? Only somebody outside of time who has the power to do that. In fact, you're doing the same thing when you have some sort of personal experience, like an answered prayer or something. You think God has spoken to you. You're doing the same thing. You're saying the answered prayer is the effect, and you're reasoning back to a cause. You're saying the cause is God. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what scientists do. They reason from effect to cause. That's what science is a search for causes. And what is the queen of all sciences? Does anyone know? Traditionally, what is it? No. It's theology. Science means knowledge. The queen of all sciences is theology. Why? Because theology seeks to discover whether or not God exists, and then if he does, how do all different areas of academic inquiry fit under one big umbrella of truth? How does physics, biology, psychology, anthropology, sociology, all the ologies, how do they fit under one big understanding of truth? We don't get that at the university anymore, but when you used to come to university, you were trying to find unity in diversity. You know, we do the opposite now. We try and find diversity and forget unity. So, theology is the ultimate science done properly. Now, how do we know that this being, which has the attributes that appear to be the God of the Bible, how do we know it's the God of the Bible and not say Yahweh, or not say Allah, I should say? For that, we got to go on to point number 3, and that is, are miracles possible? And you go, Frank, we're running out of time here. How are we going to do this? Miracles don't take long. Okay? What does God use miracles for in the Bible? To tell people who you ought to listen to. There are 3 great periods of miracles in the Bible. Moses, Elijah and Elijah, and Jesus and the apostles. Why? Because they have new information, new revelation that needs new confirmation. Why should people listen to Moses? Because he can do miracles. How about Elijah and Elijah? Because they can do miracles. How about Jesus and the apostles? Because they can do miracles. They're not done willy-nilly. Here's the problem in our modern age, however, is that people think miracles are impossible. Like Noah. Hey, Christians, can we just keep this between ourselves? Can we all agree that Noah and the ark is crazy? Yeah, thank you. It is, admit it. A resurrection, I asked you guys earlier. Anyone seen one? Nobody said yes. And for some reason, the big problem miracle in the Bible is Jonah. Is that a whale of a tale or a tale of a whale? I mean, what is the deal with Jonah? Can you actually believe in Jonah? Well, ladies and gentlemen, what is the greatest miracle in the Bible? No, the resurrection's easy compared to the greatest miracle. Yeah, the greatest miracle is... I got some of you a second time. Yeah. The greatest miracle in the Bible is the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible. You know the interesting thing? Even the atheists are admitting the evidence for the first verse. They don't think it's God, but what else could it be? You know what Hawking said in the last book he wrote? This is called The Grand Design in 2010. Here's what Hawking wrote. His explanation for how the universe came into existence, and this is a quote. This is from about page 180. Hawking said, because there is a law like gravity, the universe can and will create itself out of nothing. Unquote. Hello, McFly. What? After he said this, the esteemed philosopher and mathematician John Lennox at Oxford University, who, by the way, we're going to have on the podcast in the next couple of weeks. Lennox is brilliant. He happens to be a Christian. After Hawking said this, here's what Lennox said. When brilliant scientists talk nonsense, it's still nonsense. First of all, gravity didn't exist. Secondly, all gravity does is it works on pre-existing objects that already exist. Gravity didn't create us. There's a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator out there who not only created us, but designed this universe the way it is. And so if Genesis 1:1 is true, are these other verses possible? Of course they are. If God can create the whole universe out of nothing, you can't rule any of this out. And people will say, well, why don't we see more miracles today? Well, first of all, we don't need miracles today to show that Christianity is true. There could be no miracles since New Testament times and Christianity would still be true. I think there are miracles today, but they don't prove Christianity. You don't need them to prove Christianity. And if miracles do occur, they have to be rare. Why do they have to be rare? Because if they happen all the time, they won't get our attention as special acts of God. I mean, imagine if resurrections occurred routinely. What would the resurrection of Christ mean to us? Nothing. You go to somebody, hey, Jesus rose from the dead to prove he was God. And the guy goes, so what? Uncle George just rose from the dead 2 weeks ago. Now I got to give the inheritance back. No, it's got to be a rare event. It can't be a regular event. In fact, there are so many things that happen to us every day that really, literally are spectacular, but because they happen every day, we're kind of jaded when they happen. We're not awed anymore. How many people in here have seen your own flesh and blood born? Every mother should raise your hand. Any dads in here? Now, when you see your own flesh and blood come out of you or somebody else, you don't go, evolution, right? You go, this is amazing. We made whoopee 9 months ago, and now look at this. How does this happen? But you know what? A lot of people are jaded by it. Oh, yeah, we had another kid. Do you know how incredible that is? I mean, look at the person sitting right next to you. Why is that person even conscious if they're not sleeping right now? I mean, how do you explain consciousness from molecules bumping into it? You can't. It's the product of intelligence. You're a free will creature. How does this happen? This is why C.S. Lewis famously said, if you were to see another person on the other side in eternity, you would be very tempted to worship that person. You don't need a miracle to know how amazing this universe is. In fact, Ariel Roth, a biologist, said, God never did a miracle to convince an atheist because his ordinary works provide sufficient evidence. Just look around. When people say, I don't believe in miracles, you ought to say, look around, you're living in one. This universe is a miracle. All right, now, let's go to the key question, is the New Testament true? Is it telling us the truth about the resurrection? Because we know that truth exists, God exists, and miracles are possible. And when we look at the New Testament, we're not assuming it's some sort of inspired religious text. We just want to look at them as historical documents. Are they telling the truth? And we're just trying to figure out one thing. Did Jesus really rise from the dead? And in the book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, we have a chapter called The Top 10 Reasons We Know the New Testament Writers Told the Truth. We don't have time for 10. We're going to briefly look at 3. The first one we're going to look at is embarrassing stories, and you'll see they didn't invent these stories. Then we're going to look at eyewitness details. They actually were there. They proved they were there by what they wrote down. And then finally, excruciating deaths. They died for it. Okay, let's do embarrassing stories first. What are embarrassing stories? Historians know that when they investigate a text, if there's something embarrassing to the author or authors, it's probably true. Why is it probably true? Because you're not going to invent things that embarrass you. You're not going to invent things that make you look bad. You might invent things that make you look good, but you won't invent things that make you look bad. In fact, let me ask you guys a question in here. How many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look good? If you don't have your hand up right now, you're lying to make yourself look good. And it's not working. We know you're lying. All right, how many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look bad? No, you don't do that. You might lie to make yourself look good, but you won't lie to embarrass yourself. Well, the New Testament writers have filled the New Testament documents with embarrassing stories and details that embarrass them, and even embarrass Jesus. That's why we call this the dove factor. They're not making this up. In fact, as Wes Huff has said, the disciples are not the disciples, they're the disciples. Right? I mean, think about how many times they don't even understand what Jesus is up to. We didn't know what he was talking about. We didn't know what he meant. They don't even understand Jesus' mission until he's already gone. He's ascended to heaven. And they go, wow, I could have had a V8, right? They didn't get it. And then their leader, Peter's called Satan by Jesus. Do you think they invented this? Do you think Mark, who wrote this down, at one point said to Peter, hey, Pete, I'm going to make this a real interesting story. I'm going to have the Lord call you Satan. What do you think Peter would have said? Have him call you Satan. Look, I'm the leader here. This doesn't look good. And then Peter says, Lord, I'll never deny you. What does he wind up doing? He denies him 3 times. And then at the crucifixion, all the disciples, with the exception of one, they all run away. This is like a Monty Python movie. Run away! They all run away. And who are the brave ones? The women. The women are the brave ones. Now, who wrote the New Testament documents down? Men. Now, what man is going to invent that he was hiding for fear of the Jews while the women went down and discovered the empty tomb? Would any man in here invent that? No, if I was inventing it, I'd make myself look good, wouldn't you? I mean, I'd write that something down like this. Let's see, we marched right down there and we overpowered that elite Roman guard. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. What do you think? John said, get out. Peter roundhouse kicked him. Thomas said, we'll be back. No doubt. Some of you will get that tomorrow. And then on Sunday morning, we marched right down to the tomb, and we saw Jesus, who congratulated us on our great faith. And then we went and comforted the trembling women. I would never say I was Mr. Sissy Pants why the women went down and discovered the empty tomb. And oh, by the way, why would you never say the women were the first witnesses in that culture? I mean, forget about the fact it was embarrassing to men, it was, but independent of that, why would you never have the women be the first witnesses? Or witnesses at all? Yeah, because their testimony was not considered on par with that of a man. So if you're making up the New Testament story, you'd only have the men be the eyewitnesses. Yet all four Gospels say the women were the first witnesses, which is telling us what? They really were. In fact, one of them was a formerly demon-possessed woman. A prostitute? Gee, what a credible witness we got there. They're not making this up. I actually had a woman come up to me once, and she said, Frank, I know why Jesus appeared to the women first. I said, why? And she said, because he wanted to get the story out. I said, that is an excellent point. I had not thought of that, because ladies, when your man comes home from work, does he say much? There could have been a nuclear explosion down at the plant. He's not going to tell you. You'll see it on the news before you hear it from him. You'll be watching the news going, hey, hon, what happened? Oh, yeah, I forgot to tell you. The nuke blew up. I've been hot for 3 days. What's for dinner? He's not going to tell you. You think that's bad because we were at the University of Cincinnati about a year and a half ago, Clint and I were, and after the seminar, a guy came up to me and he said, you think that's bad? He said, I have a friend who was on a private plane, just he and the pilot, and mid-flight, the pilot died. And my friend did not know how to fly the plane. So just like in the movies, the tower talked him down. When he went home that night, his wife said, how was your day, dear? And he said, same old, same old. I can't even believe this next verse is in the New Testament, but it is. You know when Jesus takes his disciples up on the mountain at the end of the Gospel of Matthew in Galilee to give them the Great Commission? Go therefore, make disciples of all nations. Notice he doesn't say make believers. He says make disciples. There's a difference. Anyway, as he's given them the Great Commission, it says of the disciples watching him, in verse 17, this is Matthew 28:17, it says of them, some believed, but some doubted. What? He's standing resurrected right in front of them, and they're going, you see that guy over there? Yep. That guy over there is Jesus. Oh, no, it can't be Jesus. He was just killed not long ago. No, I'm telling you, it's Jesus. Jesus is dead. It's him. Do you know what they did to him, the Romans? I mean, they whipped him. They put nails in him. They put a spear in his side. Blood and water came out. If they didn't kill him, they could have been killed themselves for failing in the execution. I'm telling you, Jesus is dead. It's him. It can't be. It is. How do you know? The women told me. They're not making this up. By the way, would your Messiah be crucified if you were making this up? That he's a criminal, according to Roman law. Who's making this up? There's even potentially embarrassing details about Jesus. In Mark chapter 3, his family thinks he's out of his mind, so they want to seize him and take him home. Do you think they're making this up? No, they think he's nuts. His own brothers don't believe in him. We learn later, however, that Jesus' brother James, the guy who wrote that little book in the New Testament called, man, you guys are sharp tonight. You're teaching them well, Anna. That James dies as a martyr in the city of Jerusalem in 62 AD. He's thrown off the Temple Mount. He's the pastor of the church in Jerusalem, and then he's stoned to death by the Sanhedrin. You know who tells us this? The New Testament doesn't tell us this. Josephus, the Jewish historian, who may have seen this himself. He lived from 37 AD to about 100 AD. He tells us that Jesus' brother, James, dies as a martyr about 30 years after the alleged resurrection. Prior to the resurrection, James didn't think his brother was God. He said, yo, bro, you're not God. After the resurrection, he said, yo, bro, you're God. Now, how many people in here have a brother? All right, how many people have a brother who thinks he's God? Yeah, you don't believe in him either, do you? Neither did James. And then Jesus is called a drunkard. He's called demon-possessed. You think they invented this? They're calling the Lord demon-possessed. He's called a madman. He has his feet wiped with the hair of a prostitute, which easily could have been seen as a sexual advance. And oh, by the way, notice there are 2 prostitutes in Jesus' bloodline. Who are they? Rahab and Tamar. Now, do you think Matthew, when he was recording the genealogy, said to himself, you know what, I really think I need to spice up the Messiah's bloodline a little bit. Let me put a couple of prostitutes in here. That'll be good, Rahab, Tamar. No. In fact, there's a lot of shady people in the bloodline. Judah, from where we get the term Jew from, not a good guy. Jesus from the tribe of Judah, what does Judah do? He sells his brother Joseph into slavery into Egypt, and then he sleeps with his daughter-in-law, who's posing as a prostitute. And yet he's in the bloodline of the Messiah. David, a man after God's own heart. Yeah, but he's a liar, adulterer, and a murderer. Gee, I guess there's hope for the rest of us then, huh? Bathsheba's in the bloodline. In fact, when Matthew gets to her in the genealogy, he doesn't mention her name. What does he say instead? Does anyone know? Uriah's wife. Who's Uriah? Husband of Bathsheba, whom David had killed so he could cover up the crime. It's a slam, but he's telling the truth. Now, I just got back from a trip to Egypt, and when you go to Egypt, to those amazing temples, you know what those temples are? They're monuments of propaganda about how great the Pharaoh is. Egypt would never, no ancient culture would allow this kind of embarrassing stuff in their history. The Old Testament and the New Testament, they tell the truth about this. They don't spin any of this stuff. Why? Because they're telling the truth. In fact, Dennis Prager, you may know who he is. He's a conservative Jewish man. He doesn't believe the New Testament's true, but he believes the Old Testament's true. You know what he says about the Old Testament? He says, the reason I know the Old Testament's true is because no people group would ever invent such an embarrassing history of themselves. I mean, these Jews, they win the gold medal in sin over and over again. They keep getting dope slapped by God, but they keep doing it. Obviously, the book of Kings was not written by Ahab, right? All the kings on the Israel side are bad, all of them. There's a few on the Judah side that are good. Do you think the kings are writing this? It's not propaganda. By the way, same thing is true in our political environment. I don't care, Republican or Democrat, both of those parties spin to try and hide the truth, quite frequently, and try and put forth the best light. They don't admit mistakes, do they? The Bible is the ultimate no-spin zone. It tells you the truth. I don't know of any other ancient history that does this, written by the people who it's about. They don't admit all this. All right, let's do eyewitness details. They were there. How do we know they were there? Because they put historical crosshairs in the text. Here is 2 verses from what we call the Gospel of Luke. As I read these 2 verses, I want you to ask yourself, does it sound like this guy's making up a story? In the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, when Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea, Herod, tetrarch of Galilee, his brother Philip, tetrarch of Ituraea and Trachonitis, and Licinius, tetrarch of Abilene, during the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas, the word of God came to John, son of Zechariah, in the desert. Does it sound like he's making up a story? No, an exact date is given, 29 AD. How do we know? The 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar. And he names all these people. It would be like somebody saying today, you know, now we have the years based on the birth of Christ, but it'd be like somebody today saying it was the first year of the second Trump administration. J.D. Vance is the vice president. Mike Johnson is Speaker of the House. John Thune is the head of the Senate. You know, they just went through all of these people. You'd go, I know exactly when this is, right? That's what he's doing here. And by the way, all 8 people listed here are known from history, either through archaeology or other sources. All were known to live at this exact time. This is not a once upon a time story. Then when you look at the book of Acts, there are 84 historically confirmed eyewitness details in the book of Acts. These are all listed in the book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. A Roman historian by the name of Colin Hemmer, I don't even know if he was a Christian, but he just went through the book of Acts and he said, yep, that's right, that's right, that's right, that's right. He's getting all these things right. In fact, This is a picture from Corinth. I took this picture myself. If you ever get to go on a Footsteps of Paul cruise, I love Corinth because there's no modern city built on it. You stand right where the Apostle Paul stood in Corinth. Anyway, Sir William Ramsay, 100 years ago, was a great archaeologist who thought Luke wasn't telling the truth. After 20 years of research, he said Luke is an historian of first rank, and he said this: Luke references 32 countries, 54 cities, and 9 islands with no mistakes. How does he do this? He doesn't have Google Earth. He doesn't have the internet. The only way he could do this if he was there or he knew somebody who was. Also, there are several other of these details in Luke's gospel. There are 59 of these historically confirmed or historically probable eyewitness details in the Gospel of John. Again, they're all listed in I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. And the New Testament documents cite more than 30 people confirmed by secular sources or archaeology. Okay, I want you to write these down, okay? Here they are. You got them? Look at all these people that the Bible talks about that have been discovered outside the Bible to live at this exact time. The Bible even gets all the Herods right, by the way. James is mentioned by Josephus, so is John the Baptist. Jesus is too. I didn't put him on this list, but he could be on this list. Pilate is mentioned. All of these people are mentioned. Some of them, we have found archaeological discoveries, like this is an archaeological discovery of Pilate found in Caesarea in 1961, the coastal town up there on the Mediterranean in the northern part of Israel. We also have coins from Pilate. We have a ring seal from Pilate. We also have Pilate being mentioned by Josephus. We know Pilate existed. This discovery might be my favorite of all time. This is an ossuary. What's an ossuary? It's a burial box that the Jews used from about 20 BC to about 70 AD. What they would do is they would bury people and a year later go back into the tomb when just bones remained, and they would put the bones in this limestone box known as an ossuary because they believed in a bodily resurrection. They wanted to keep the bones together. And this particular ossuary is the ossuary of Caiaphas, the high priest who sentenced Jesus to die. This was discovered in 1990. Inside this very ornate ossuary, they found the bones of a 60-year-old man and his family. So not only do we know that Caiaphas existed, we have his bones. This is the guy that, as recorded in many of the Gospels, said, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" And Jesus said, "I am, and you will see the Son of Man coming with power on the clouds." And what did Caiaphas do? Tore his robes, and he said, "Did you hear what he said? Blasphemy, you must die." That guy. We also have the remains of a crucified victim. This is the real remains. This is just a mock-up to show you the relative angle of the nail going through the heel bone. By the way, they used to take the nails out of crucified victims. They couldn't get the nail out of this one because it's bent, so they left it in. Now, if you go to the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, you will see these artifacts right next to one another. In fact, you will see this heel bone, and next to it is this guy, who is a criminal, his ossuary, which is just a plain limestone box. And then next to it, you'll see the Pilate stone, and then you'll see the Caiaphas ossuary. And I recorded this a couple years ago in Israel. It's only about 30 seconds long. Check this out. That's the heel bone. I don't know if you can hear this. That's his ossuary. It's plain. Here's the Pilate stone. There's Caiaphas. Look at how ornate that is. He's an important person, right? And you compare it to this one and you go, this guy's a commoner. This guy is royalty of some kind. And that thing is sitting right on the table. You could touch it, but you'd probably be shot if you did. Okay? In fact, there are 7 biblical names associated with Jesus' crucifixion found in archaeology. I don't have time to go into details. These are coins from Herod. This is the burial box of the son of Simon of Cyrene. Who's Simon of Cyrene? That's the guy who carried the cross. Well, his son, Alexander, was put in an ossuary. This was discovered in the Kidron Valley in 1941, and it says on the side of it, Alexander of Cyrene, son of Simon. What's Cyrene? Cyrene is like Libya. How many Alexanders who have a father named Simon were buried in a Jewish cemetery in the 1st century? Only the guy that carried Jesus' cross, probably. There's the Pilate stone over there. Oh, Peter's been found in Bethsaida. He's also been found in Capernaum. Here's the Caiaphas ossuary. This is Annas' tomb. Who is Annas? The father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the high priest himself at one point. And his tomb was found south of the Temple Mount. And Jesus was found. Not his ossuary, because Jesus didn't have an ossuary. But Jesus' brother had an ossuary. His name is James. And on the side of this, it said, James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. Very unusual to put the brother on the side of an ossuary. In fact, when this thing was discovered on the antiquities market about 15 to 20 years ago, they thought it was a fake. And the guy who owned it went to trial because it's against the law to create fakes. After it went through trial, they realized it was legit. So there's the James ossuary. Now, we could spend a lot more time on archaeology. We don't have time. We've got to do the last one, excruciating deaths. They died for it. We know they didn't invent it. We know they were there, and then they went and died for it. And this is the argument that said these men who were in a position to know whether Jesus had risen from the dead died excruciating deaths when they could have saved themselves by saying, look, it never happened. Now, it's really important to keep in mind that all the writers in the New Testament were Jews, with the exception of Luke. Luke's the only Gentile. They're Jews who think they're God's chosen people. And here's a couple things they didn't believe. They didn't think one guy could claim to be God. That would be blasphemy. And they didn't think one guy would rise from the dead in the middle of time. They knew we'd all rise from the dead at the end of time because Daniel and Isaiah talk about that. But they didn't think a Messiah would come who would claim to be God and rise from the dead. And what do they wind up doing? Saying exactly that. In fact, it's important to keep in mind the apostles' beliefs and practices before and after the resurrection. Before the resurrection, they believed in animal sacrifice. They've been slaying lambs to Yahweh for hundreds of years. Jesus comes along and they go, you know what? We don't need to slay these lambs anymore because these lambs are just symbols of the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Here he is. They do away with the sacrificial system virtually overnight. Before, they believed in a binding law of Moses. Afterwards, Christ's life fulfills the binding law of Moses. Before, strict monotheism. Afterwards, a trinity. 3 persons in one divine essence. Yes, you can see the Trinity in the Old Testament, but it's much more pronounced in the New. Before, they believed in the Sabbath. In fact, they thought they could be stoned for not obeying the Sabbath. After, they're worshiping on Sunday because that's the day he rose. And Paul even writes, don't let anyone tell you have to obey any Sabbath or festival day. In fact, out of the 10 commandments, 9 of them are repeated in the New Testament. What's the only one not repeated? The Sabbath. Why? Because the Sabbath has arrived. Jesus is our rest. We rest in him. Before, they believed in a conquering Messiah. Afterwards, a sacrificial Messiah. Well, Jesus, when he comes again, will conquer, but they didn't anticipate that one. Before, they believed in circumcision. Afterwards, baptism and communion. Now, for just a second, go back to embarrassing stories for a second, or embarrassing details. Ladies and gentlemen, is there anyone in this room that would invent a religion that had this as a point of entry? Who would do this? Hey, what do I got to do to join your group? What? No, I'm out. Forget about it. Who's going to do this? Now, ladies and gentlemen, what would have caused these pious Jews who thought they were God's chosen people to abandon everything on the left and adopt everything on the right virtually overnight? Who's going to do that? What's going to cause them to do that? The only thing I can think of is what psychologists call an impact event. What's an impact event? An impact event is an event that occurs in your life that is so dramatic that it can turn you around 180 degrees just like that. Some impact events are so dramatic that although you might not remember what you had for breakfast this morning, you'll remember an impact event that happened 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago if you're old enough. There may be only 1 or 2 people in this room that can answer this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If you can remember where you were and what you were doing November 22nd, 1963, hold your hand up and hold it up high. All right, ladies and gentlemen, you see these people with their hands up? These people are very old. Right. November 22nd, 1963 is my earliest memory. I was 2 years old in 2 days. Yes, I'm 63 years old now. I know. I don't look a day over 62. In fact, when I turned 50, my wife was very encouraging. She said, honey, you're going to live to be 100. I said, how do you know? She said, because you look half dead already. Anyway, November 22nd, 1963, I'm standing in our living room in Wanamassa, New Jersey, and my mother is sitting on an ottoman in front of a black and white TV, weeping uncontrollably. Mommy, what's the matter? What's the matter? They killed the president. They killed the president. President Kennedy assassinated that day. I can still see my mother in my mind right now, sitting on that ottoman when she was 26 years old. She's 87 today. But I can see her when she was 26. It's my earliest memory. It was an impact event. I don't remember anything before that, and very little after that. Where were you when the second plane hit the tower? Some of you are old enough can remember that. I was in my home office in Charlotte, North Carolina. I had the TV on behind me. I saw the first tower had been hit. I didn't know by what. And I was talking to a pastor on the north side of Charlotte, and we were talking about what the topic would be if I came to his church to speak. And I said, you got the TV on? He goes, yeah. I said, maybe a Cessna hit the World Trade Tower. And we're just talking, and suddenly he screams into the phone, the second tower just got hit. I turned around, looked at the TV. The second tower's on fire. I said, was it a Cessna? He goes, no, it looked like it was like a United plane. I said, you saw that? He said, it's on live TV. I said, look, let me call you back. I hung up the phone. For some reason that morning I had CNN on, the communist news network. And I'm not making this up, but the commentator on CNN said, one has to think there's some sort of navigational error here. I said, navigational error? You dimwit. This is the clearest day in the history of the Big Apple. What do you think, the pilots can't see where they're going? I mean, you think Stevie Wonder's flying these planes? I mean, come on, man. This is terrorism. I called that pastor the next day. I said, we're going to come to your church and talk about Islam because that's what this is related to. Now, 9/11 was over 23 years ago. But those of you who are old enough can remember something about that day. But if I were to ask you where you were 23 days ago, most of you are going to go, I don't know, man. Look at my iPhone. What was I doing 23 days? Why can't you remember something from 23 years ago but not 23 days ago? No impact event 23 days ago. Impact event 23 years ago. Where were you when Trump got shot last summer? You remember that. Why? I was outside. My mother called me on the phone. She goes, Trump's been shot. I go, what? Is he all right? What do you mean he's been shot? And she said, well, he stood up. I said, okay, he's got blood on his face. Okay, ran in for the next 12 hours. We're all glued to the TV. Like, what happened? You know, we still don't know what happened, do we? Why do you remember impact events? By the way, do you think a resurrection would have been an impact event? Do you think they would have had any trouble remembering what he said and did? That's the only way I could figure out whether they would have abandoned everything on the left and adopt everything on the right virtually overnight. In fact, what did the New Testament writers have to gain by making up a new religion? What did they have to gain? Nothing. They got kicked out of the synagogue, then they got beaten, tortured, and killed. Last time I checked, that was not a list of perks, right? And in fact, they had every motive to say the resurrection did not happen, not every motive to say it did. You know, a lot of times I get the question, and if you're a Christian, maybe you get the question too. Are there any non-Christian writers that talk about Jesus and the apostles? Yeah. They're all in chapter 9 of I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. But you know what the question often assumes, or the questioner often assumes? You really can't trust the New Testament writers because you see, these people were Christians. They were biased. You have to look at the non-Christian writers to figure out what really happened. Now, if you think about that for more than 5 seconds, you'll realize how stupid that assumption is. What did these people have to gain by saying it was true? They had everything to lose by saying it was true. In fact, some of you may know my friend J. Warner Wallace, the cold case homicide detective who's been on Dateline more than any other homicide detective because he solves murders decades old. Jim has used his homicide skills to investigate the greatest homicide of all time, the homicide of Jesus. In fact, you can get his book, Cold Case Christianity, or go to his website by the same name. Anyway, Jim says whenever he finds a body that he knows has been murdered, he says, I don't need to track down 1,000 possible motivations for that guy being murdered. That guy was murdered for one or more of these three reasons. There was either a sex issue, a money issue, or a power issue. Sex, money, or power are the three things that can motivate people to murder. In fact, they're the same three things that can motivate any of us to sin. Why? Because sex, money, and power are good things. In fact, they're so good, we'll often take shortcuts to get them. And so Jim says, if you're going to say the New Testament writers invented all this, you got to find one or more of those three motivators. All right, let's take a look, ladies and gentlemen. Did the New Testament writers and apostles suddenly get real popular with the ladies for saying Jesus had resurrected from the dead? No, they didn't get sex. Did they get money? No, they weren't 21st century prosperity gospel preachers. Did they get power? No, they got the opposite of power. They got persecuted. Paul had power when he was persecuting the church. As soon as he becomes a Christian, he's the one persecuted. They didn't get sex. They didn't get money. They didn't get power. There's no motive to invent this. And then why would they die for a known lie? At this point, you're going to say, wait, Frank, time out. If you're going to say that martyrdom somehow gives evidence for Christianity, don't you have to say it gives evidence for Islam? And the answer is no. Why? Because there's a lot of differences between the Muslim martyrs and the New Testament martyrs. But I'm going to give you one difference for our purposes here. The Muslim martyrs haven't witnessed anything that tells them that Islam is true. They just have faith. The New Testament martyrs, on the other hand, witnessed the resurrected Jesus. They saw Jesus. They touched Jesus. They ate with Jesus. They verified with their own senses that Jesus had risen from the dead. Some people will die for something they think is true but really isn't. Nobody will die for something they know is false. The New Testament writers knew that it was true because they verified it with their own senses. So you can't get better evidence than that unless you were there yourself. All right. Very last thing I'm going to say about the New Testament here is going to sound like heresy to those of you who, like me, believe the Bible is the inerrant word of God. But it's not. Stick with me. Christianity is not true because a series of documents we put under one binding we call the Bible says it's true. In fact, Christianity would be true if the Bible never existed. You say, how can that be? Ladies and gentlemen, do you realize there were thousands of Christians before a line of the New Testament was ever written? Why? Because they witnessed the resurrected Jesus. They didn't read about it in a book. In other words, Christianity did not originate with a book. Christianity originated with an event, the resurrection. There would be no series of documents written by Jews in the first century claiming a man claimed to be God and rose from the dead unless a man really did claim to be God and really did rise from the dead. In other words, the cause of Christianity is not the New Testament. The cause of Christianity is the resurrection. We could put it this way. The New Testament writers did not create the resurrection. The resurrection created the New Testament writers. Do you see the point here? Now, thankfully, they wrote it down so we could know about it and orient our lives according to it. But the origin of Christianity is not the Bible. The origin of Christianity is the resurrection. And if the resurrection occurred, Christianity is true. If the resurrection didn't occur, it's false. All right, so overall argument. Does truth exist? If somebody says there's no truth, you're going to say, is that true? Does God exist? First argument, cosmological. One guy's with me. Second argument, teleological. Third argument, moral. From those three arguments, we get a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created and sustains all things. Are miracles possible? What's the greatest miracle in the Bible? Creation. Genesis 1:1. Even atheists are admitting the evidence for that. Is the New Testament writers, are they telling us the truth? We just went through three reasons they are. There's more in the book. Now, if you want to go further, we did bring some books and DVDs, and I want to point out all the proceeds from the books and the DVDs will go to feed needy children. Mine. Hey, don't blow my joke, man. this guy's been here before. We have the book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. We have a 12-part DVD series that goes through all this, and you can take small groups through it or high schools through it. We can get workbooks on our website. Oh, by the way, before I forget, follow that QR code. I'm going to send you this entire PowerPoint presentation for free in PDF format and about a dozen others. In fact, I showed you maybe 50 slides tonight. The whole PowerPoint presentation is 362 slides. So, and that's what's in the expanded edition of this. I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. It's over 10 hours long, all right? This book, Hollywood Heroes, you know, there's a lot of garbage that comes out of Hollywood, but you would be shocked to learn that the greatest movie franchises, the most successful movie franchises of the past 50 years have all stolen from the greatest story ever told, the story of Jesus. And who's the ultimate hero? Well, the book points it out, it's Jesus. And yet all these other heroes you read about, they're all modeled after Jesus to some extent, whether it's Iron Man, whether it's Captain America, whether it's the Star Wars heroes or Lord of the Rings or Batman or Spider-Man or Superman or Harry Potter. Harry Potter! You would be shocked to learn that J.K. Rowling took the story right out of the Bible. She admits it. Anyway, if you know people that like movies, they're going to love Jesus. And then people say, you know, Frank, that book's over 400 pages. Can you write a shorter one? Yeah, here it is. It's a comic book. Can you handle that? It'll take you 10 minutes to read. It's basically a summary of that. All right? All right, so it's true. So what? So what if Christianity's true? Well, when I was in the Navy, we had to earn golden wings. I was in aviation, and they were fairly hard to earn, but there's nothing more difficult to earn in the Navy than a golden trident. And those who earn a golden trident, the SEALs, wear that trident with pride. And just like Michael Monsoor sacrificed himself to save his fellow SEALs, Jesus sacrificed himself to save us. Although Monsoor died for his friends, you know what Jesus did? He died for his enemies. All of us. Anyway, when Michael Monsoor was buried in Rosecrans Cemetery in San Diego, California, just about every Navy SEAL showed up for his funeral. When they passed his casket, they took off their tridents and they pressed them into his casket. They took their identity and put their identity in the one that died for them. That's what we're supposed to do. But you know, our culture says, oh no, put your identity in your sexual preference, or put your identity in your ethnic group, or put your identity in your job, or your bank account, or even another person. Ladies and gentlemen, you know how fragile those identities are? Like, for example, suppose you put your identity in your sexual preference. What happens when you can no longer sexually perform, or you're no longer sexually preferred? That may come sooner. You no longer have an identity? If you put your identity in your job, what happens when you lose your job? You no longer have an identity? Even if you put your identity in another person, what happens when, God forbid, that person dies or leaves you? You no longer have an identity? No, you're not supposed to put your identity, even in good things here. You're supposed to put your identity in your Savior, the one that died for you, who said that he didn't come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. So stop trying to achieve your identity. Do you know that Christianity is the only worldview where you don't achieve your identity? You receive your identity. You don't achieve it. You receive it. You're a child of God, as John says in his gospel. He gives you the right to become a child of God. And he proved that you get this eternal identity by rising from the dead. So, ladies and gentlemen, there's only two things you're going to get in the afterlife. You're either going to get justice or you're going to get grace. Does anyone in here want justice? Do you know Christianity is the only worldview that relies on grace? Everybody else says, oh, you got to work your way to God. No. Christianity, God works his way to you. You just need to accept what he's done. Have you done that? And if you haven't done that, why haven't you? It's free. Oh, you don't have to do it. If you don't, God's not going to force you into heaven against your will. He's going to separate himself from you in a place called hell. In fact, what is hell? It's separation from God. It's going to be up to you what decision you make. But Jesus went to the cross so he could offer grace, because he's an infinite being and he can't allow injustice. So he has to punish sin. Where is he going to punish sin? He wants to punish it in an innocent substitute in our place. We can't pay for our own sins because we're already guilty. So he's the one that comes to earth. He adds humanity to his deity, and he allows the creatures that rebelled against him to torture and kill him so he could take our punishment upon himself. That's why Jesus is the only way. It's not an arbitrary claim. There's no other way an infinitely just being can allow this to happen. He can't remain just unless he punishes sin. So who does he punish? He punishes himself. That's why it's the greatest story ever told. It happens to be true. What are you going to do with it? It's up to you. In fact, let's look at it one last way. Everyone you love will die. Everything you build will crumble. Everything you say will be forgotten. Everything you do will come to nothing. You and your identity will die and vanish unless the resurrection's true. And it is. All right. Before we go to questions, I want Anna to tell everybody in here how you can go further in this thing we call apologetics, evidence for the faith, because that's what she does and the entire team of students here does. So Anna, tell people what Ratio Christi is, how they can become a part of it if they want to be.
Sure thing. My students, can you guys stand up? Give everybody a wave.
Here they are.
Please ask them any questions that you might have. We meet here, if you can, on Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. Which is why we do like a Wednesday night at 8 p.m. session without church evening. But we meet at the campus house of prayer up in the Fort area. That's in Christ Chapel. You need a secret code to get in. Talk to one of us and show us your TID and we'll let you in. So please come and study with us. We're excited. We go point by point. You can ask whatever question you wish. It's live Q&A every single night. And we are completely and totally student run, which means you pick the topics that you want to study. We don't lecture at you. It's not another class. It is just live apologetics all night long. And by the way, we do go all night long very often, don't we, guys?
Yeah.
So please come out and study with us if you'd like.
And can you also tell them what you do professionally, because that kind of ties into what you're doing.
I'm also a clinician who specializes in spiritual abuse.
I'm going to get closer so people out there can hear on the mic. Go ahead.
I'm a clinician who specializes in spiritual abuse, in particular cults and new religions. We have a lot of aberrant teachings here in East Tennessee, and a ton of force and control. We have lots of narcissists that wear microphones and pretend to be preachers and shepherds and leaders, and they abuse Christians on the regular. So if you are a student here at UT, you can receive therapy for free if you wish it. Just come and talk to us. Besides that, if you need clinical care, we do have a clinic specializing in healing spiritual abuse, PTSD, force and controlled individuals who have been abused in those settings, and with Christian clinicians the entire way through. Let me know if you have any questions.
Check her out. She's doing a lot of great work here, ladies and gentlemen.
All right, now we're going to go to questions, and since no one likes to ask the first question, we're going to move right on to the second question. At the microphone. You got to come to the microphone, otherwise the people out there in internet land will not hear you. So that's why we need you to come up to the microphone. All right. Yes, sir. What's your name? Your name is Hope? Man, what a name. Beautiful. Go ahead, Hope.
Okay, I got a kind of an interesting church history question for you.
I don't know if I'll be able to answer it, but go ahead.
Okay, fair enough. I was wondering, what is your opinion on the early church fathers, the 1st and 2nd century, let's just say, on their viewpoints on baptism, Eucharist,
Did you ask the Connectleys a question like this?
Me?
At Harvard?
Man, I wasn't even here before.
You weren't here? No, not here. There's somebody that asked the Connectleys, Cliff and Stewart, who were on campus at Harvard a couple weeks ago, a similar question.
That was my cousin.
Was it your cousin?
No.
Oh, all right. Okay. All right. All right.
But what do you think? What do you think?
Well, I haven't studied all the early church fathers on what they believed. Some believed in transubstantiation, or at least the presence in the host. Others didn't. And while the church fathers are people that we ought to study, they're not authoritative, at least Protestants don't think so. See, Roman Catholics, and I came out of the Roman Catholic Church because I'm from New Jersey and it's the law. All right? So I went to Catholic high school and the whole deal. But Catholics have an authority that isn't just the Bible. They'll often look to church fathers, church councils, popes, that kind of thing for their theological beliefs, whereas Protestants say, no, the scriptures are sufficient alone. So that's an open debate, that Christians can have. Is it? I don't think when Jesus is holding bread there in Capernaum and he says, I'm the bread of life, and he says, this is my body, that he literally meant that that host was his body. Otherwise, he'd be incarnated twice, right?
Well,
he would be incarnated and his host would be him as well.
Well,
I don't think that's what he meant. He was using a lot of metaphors at that time. When he says, I'm the bread of life, why did he say that? Because he just fed bread at Bethsaida to 5,000 people.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
But hear me out on one thing. Hear me out on one thing.
Go ahead.
Jesus in John 6:53 says that those who don't eat my flesh and drink my blood have no life in you. And in 1 Corinthians 11, it says that he talks about spiritually, where Paul says he mentions something spiritually as in just a symbolic way. But when he comes to talk about the Eucharist, he doesn't mention as it just being symbolic. He mentions that those who have eaten it and have taken it unworthily, some have fallen asleep, as in died or even gotten sick.
Yeah, that's right. You ought to take the Eucharist or communion with great reverence.
Okay.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that Jesus is literally in the Eucharist. Now, I'm open to that. And that's something we can agree to disagree on. It's not, in my view, an essential of the faith.
Okay. Oh, fair enough.
We can debate all this. Now, there is a book that my co-author wrote, Dr. Norman Geisler, 30 years ago, but I think it's still a great work. It's endorsed by both Roman Catholics and evangelicals. It's called Roman Catholics and Evangelicals, Agreements and Differences.
Is that one of the books you're giving away tonight?
I don't have it here. That book now is like $50. You can hardly get it because it's 30 years old.
50?
So I'd go broke giving that one away. All right? But if you
take
want
donations.
if you want a good book, hope that'll give Roman Catholics and evangelicals a fair shot. Although he's a Protestant, he's going to land on the Protestant side. Check that book out.
All right, appreciate
All right?
it, man.
Thanks,
All right.
Hope.
Thank you.
All right, great question. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Yes, good evening to you, Frank. My name is James. I'm
James.
also a Navy veteran, 1986, 1995.
Woo,
86,
All right, thank you.
1990.
I was 1984 to 1992.
Right, I was Navy meteorology, so without us, you couldn't fly. Anyway, that being said...
You're the guy that got me caught in that thunderstorm.
No, I'm the
right.
one that wrote, don't worry about the ice, the lightning will knock it off the wings.
Oh, thanks. Perfect.
I had a quick question, if you could help me out, Dr. Turek. This is about a scripture in Genesis 1. And I asked this to Ken Ham, didn't get a real good answer to it. So if you could just hear me out on this and kind of help me out. I would like some clarification on this. It says in Genesis 1:31, it says that God looked upon his creation and it was very good. That's in the English, alrighty? So since God is perfect, why would the word perfect be missing to describe his creation? The Hebrew word used is tob, as I understand it, and it doesn't translate as perfect. It only translates as good. So to follow on that, was there some sort of corruption introduced? As some commentators speculate in Genesis 1:2, I am not advocating for the gap theory on this one. Could this have been when the Lord banished Lucifer and his angels who revolted against him?
It could be, but the key word you used in your question is speculate. Because, the Bible doesn't explicitly tell us how Satan fell. We have to piece things together, and sometimes it appears that Isaiah is talking about the king of Babylon when he's referring to Lucifer. Is he referring to the king of Babylon or Lucifer? We don't know. Okay, so we're speculating how the angels fell and how Satan fell. I don't think we can be dogmatic about how it happened. And whether he should have used the word perfect there or just very good, I think we're reading a lot into those words. You could be right, but I wouldn't be confident that that is the right interpretation. So I don't know. I think there's a lot of speculation going on there.
Right. Well, I'm asking because I'm also a linguist, speak Russian and German, and so I've studied words
Ja,
and semantics.
sprechen Sie Deutsch?
Ich spreche Deutsch.
Ich spreche nicht gut.
Okay. Говорите по-русски?
Nein.
Nine. Okay. That's why I was curious if there might be if I'm just reading too much into it, but expecting to God be perfect and not to have His creation perfect, I thought that was kind of inconsistent with His character.
Well, see, and I don't know Hebrew, so I'm not the guy to ask. But you might look up Michael Heiser. He's the late Old Testament scholar that dealt a lot with that. You might look up his work. Or you might go to Blue Letter Bible because there are some commentaries up there that might be helpful. Or the best gold standard Bible study is Logos Bible Study. And you used to have to pay hundreds of dollars for this thing. Now you can just pay a monthly fee and access all these amazing works right on your computer. You might want to check into that, James.
Thank you very much.
All right, and thanks for your service. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Hey, sir. I'm Judah.
Judah.
Yep.
From the tribe of?
Yeah, the terrible
Judah.
dude.
Go ahead.
So I kind of have grew up dispensationalist and with this futuristic mindset of Jesus physically coming back. But I've recently come to a different point of view, and I can get into that if we want. But to preface, throughout the Old Testament, you have this day of the Lord that happens. And a lot of the times there's time statements like near, soon.
You're going to have to be a little louder, Judah, for the people in the back. Unfortunately, that mic is not amplified.
Connected to that. Okay.
So go ahead.
So there's time statements like near, soon, quickly, about day of the Lord, so like Babylon, Assyria. And then when we get to the New Testament with the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24, and even Revelation, with those time statements also being soon, near, quickly, at hand, if I'm a first century Jew or even a non-Jew, a Gentile, if I'm reading these New Testament documents, would you think that they think that that event would happen soon and quickly given the destruction of the temple in 70
I think
AD?
the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24, there's a near-term fulfillment and a long-term fulfillment. The near-term fulfillment was 70 AD. The long-term fulfillment is going to be when Jesus comes back.
So where does he specify the second fulfillment?
Well, this is common among New Testament prophecies, as you know. There's normally a near-term fulfillment, so the people at that time can understand it came true, but then there's a longer-term fulfillment as well. Take a look at in Matthew 24, where Jesus says, when you see the armies descending on Jerusalem, flee to the mountains. Well, that's what the Christians did in 70 AD.
Right.
Just about all of them escaped the destruction. But if he's talking just about the end of the world, does it make any sense to flee to the mountains? No, of course not, right? The mountains are going to be gone too. So there's a near-term fulfillment and a long-term fulfillment. So when he says these things are going to happen before this generation passes away, I think he meant the generation at the time. That's the natural reading there. Right. And about 40 years after he said that, that's when it happened. One generation. But there's also a longer-term fulfillment when Jesus comes again. So I think it's both.
Okay.
All right.
Do you know where he says that?
Says
though?
what?
About a long-term, because here's the thing with dual fulfillment for me, at least, and how I see it, is why can't there be a third, a fourth, or even some symbolic ones from the Old Testament, also third and fourth in our day today?
Well, clearly not everything in Matthew 24 has happened. So there has to be a sense that there's he's talking about this aspect. And look, we'd have to read the whole thing. We don't have time to read the whole thing.
Sure, yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So some things happened in 70 AD. Some things have yet to happen in the Olivet Discourse. But he said this is going to happen before the end of the age. The end of the age was when the temple went down. Right. But then he's going to come again at a later time. So I think it's both. But
all right.
Anyway,
thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, Judah. By the way, you should know this. You're from the tribe of Judah. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Hi, Frank. I have been a fan for a very long time. So this is a
Thanks. What's your name?
Experience. Hi, I'm Nick.
Hey, Nick. Go ahead.
My question has to do with the Great Flood, and my question has to go with why don't we see more evidence? As the Great Flood would have been a mass extinction event that would have happened very close in the geologic timescale, 5,000 years ago, 7,000 years ago. And my question is, why don't we see more evidence? Why do we not see, Like, why isn't there we would see fossil graveyards everywhere dated to 5,000 years ago? Like, just why don't we see more?
Well, some say that when the Bible talks about a worldwide flood, it meant the known world at the time, a local flood where people were, not everywhere across, not the whole globe. Okay, just like when Paul says, "I preach to the whole world," he didn't come over here to the United States. Okay, he was talking about the known world at the time, and so that's what some will say. And Ross takes that view where he says it's a local flood. It killed all the people, but it didn't cover the entire earth, okay? The folks that would take a whole earth view would be the guy that just mentioned, Ken Ham. If you go to Answers in Genesis, they will try and give some reasons why it could have been a global flood. Like, you do find, seashells at the top of mountains, right? Is that because of tectonic uplift? Or did the whole world come? You got to make a claim there. We don't know.
Yes. My response to that is Genesis 7:19 says all the high mountains under the whole sky were covered.
Right.
Which strongly indicates that this would have been a global flood.
Well, it didn't have to be a global flood in order to cover the mountains where the people were. Mm-hmm. It could have just been the mountains of Ararat at the time and in that area. The mountains of Ararat, by the way, this is why we went on a Noah's Ark expedition to Iran in 2006, because the mountains of Ararat could include the Elburz Mountains, which are in Iran. Mm-hmm. So Mount Ararat was named at about 1100 or 1200 AD. It's one single volcanic cone in Turkey. Mm-hmm. It doesn't say that, the Bible doesn't say that Noah's Ark came to rest on Mount Ararat. It says the mountains of Ararat. Mm-hmm. So it's a range, it's an area.
I would also say that it may also call into question the movements of early humans, but I guess that's also maybe a discussion. That's a longer discussion for another time.
There's a lot of speculation running after too few facts, in my view. Whether it was entire Earth or local doesn't affect my faith at all, because if Jesus rose from the dead and he said Noah was real, I'm going with Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
Right? All right, thanks. Hey, what's your name?
Hi, Frank. My name's Blake.
Blake, go ahead, sir.
I'm going to ask my resurrection question, although Judah did inspire my apocalyptic question too, so maybe I'll get back in line afterwards.
All right, go ahead.
So, what would be your explanation for why Jesus and the angels told the disciples that they needed to go to Galilee to see him when he was just going to appear to them in Jerusalem and then tell them to stay in Jerusalem?
You're talking about Matthew has him in Galilee and Luke has him in Jerusalem?
Well, yeah, specifically that in Matthew, Jesus and the angels tell the disciples that they need to go to Galilee to see him, but then he just appears to them in Jerusalem in John, and then he appears to them again in Jerusalem in John.
Okay, look, all writing is selective. No writer can cover every single event. They all have to decide what they're going to cover and what they're not going to cover. So if Matthew says they went to Galilee and that's where Jesus gave them the Great Commission, that would seem to happen. Luke just leaves that out. He compresses that. And we do that all the time. We don't, in fact, are you married by any chance?
I am not.
All right. Well, when you get married.
My beautiful girlfriend's in the back, but not married yet.
Beautiful girlfriend. Okay. When you get married, you're going to realize that the way guys tell stories and the way women tell stories are different. Because if I start telling a story and I'm done, she goes, well, you left this out, you left that out. And yeah, I know. I'm just trying to get to the bottom line, Yeah. So
I think what I'm getting at, though, is that I think the resurrection stories contradict significantly.
In what sense?
In the sense that Jesus and the angels tell the disciples that they need to go to Galilee, but instead Jesus just appears in Jerusalem, and then he tells them on that first appearance that they need to stay in Jerusalem.
Okay.
So,
well, again, these.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, each writer can't cover every single event that occurs. All right. Yeah.
But even just granting his. Traditional authorship. Let's just talk about Matthew and John.
Okay.
Right?
Matthew and John or Matthew and Luke? Who are you talking about?
Well, if you piece together all four of the resurrection stories, I think they significantly contradict. But let's make it simpler. Let's just talk about just Matthew and just John.
Okay, hang on a sec. Let's say everything you're saying. Hold on a second. Let's say what you're saying is true. That they do contradict. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Frank, that is not an answer. That is not an answer to my question, Frank.
That wasn't my answer, but I like
I came here to be friendly, Frank. Come on.
Okay, what?
God, hey there.
Blake, what is this?
That's the Titanic.
Okay, good. This is what happened. This is the Boston Daily Globe the day after the Titanic sank. Titanic sinks, 1,500 die. Carpathia picks up 675 out of 2,200. Races for New York. Survivors mostly women and children. Okay, New York Times says Titanic sinks 4 hours after hitting an iceberg. 186 rescued by Carpathia. Probably 1,250 perish. And they talk about certain people missing. Worst ocean disaster, Nork Advocate in world's history. Titanic goes down, wait a minute, 1,341 lives are lost. 868, close to that previous number, but not exactly. Washington Post, before Bezos, 1,800 souls lost. This says 1,800. It says latest wireless from the Olympics, only 675 saved.
Yeah. No.
What should we conclude from this?
I understand the analogy you're trying to make, but I do think this is a little bit of a red herring from what the texts actually say.
No.
I'm trying to talk. We're Matthew and John. Did Matthew and John write Matthew and John?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay. I disagree.
Why? Who wrote them?
Who wrote them?
Yeah.
We don't know. They're anonymous.
Where does it say they're anonymous?
Where does it say that it's
Every manuscript that we have with a cover page has Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John.
I disagree. P1 doesn't.
Does it have a cover page?
It doesn't. It doesn't attribute. It's a P1. I don't think it attributes it to Matthew. No.
Well,
we're missing the fly leaf off of it. But
well, there you go. You're missing it. So here, let me finish.
I know, but
let me finish the point here. Look at this. What should we conclude from this?
Okay, I'm gonna make my question really simple. Frank, can you tell me about the resurrection of Jesus? What happened? Who was there? Like, what happened at the resurrection of Jesus?
What does every witness say happened to Jesus?
That you gotta be more specific.
That he rose from the dead. Everybody says he rose from the dead. You have different details on the Titanic. Should we conclude that the Titanic did not sink because of these different details?
Do we have appearances in Mark?
Hold on. Let me ask you the question.
But you're asking me a question.
Let's say for the sake of argument, Blake, you're right. They contradict. What does that prove?
That Matthew and John are not eyewitness testimonies, as most scholars agree.
Oh, no. Most scholars don't agree. John in particular.
Sorry, let me.
Okay. John in particular has eyewitness details throughout it.
I disagree because Matthew and John contradict. And let me take my statement back.
Blake, contradictions.
Can we pull up what happened at the resurrection of Jesus?
I'm trying to figure out what your question is. What do you mean?
Can you tell me about the resurrection of Jesus Christ? The specific, who was there? Who was there? Who saw it? What happened?
Well, you'd have to go to the accounts. And some say women were there. Mary and the other women. John gets to the tomb before Peter. Mm-hmm. And then in the earliest evidence for the resurrection, which is where?
Paul.
Yeah, where is it?
1 Corinthians 15.
Right, 1 Corinthians 15, mm-hmm. where he lists 14 people mm-hmm. that saw the resurrected Jesus plus another 500. Mm-hmm. So that's who saw Jesus resurrected. Mm-hmm. And you know that goes all the way back to the event itself.
I disagree, but that's okay.
Blake, are you a student of this? Do you know what the scholars say?
A little bit.
Okay, so what do the scholars say about 1 Corinthians 15, 3-8?
First of all, we can talk about scholarship. I was trying to just keep it specific, and I will see my time because I know there's people behind me too. Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, what do they say about the earliest evidence for the what does Bart Ehrman say about it?
I don't want to, Frank. I don't want to bring Bart into it. Okay,
I do.
But do you understand how I'm asking very specific questions because I want to have specific dialogues about, because I think if a lot of people sat and compared the resurrection accounts and tried to piece them together, they notice that there's significant contradictions.
Let's say you're absolutely right. What does that prove?
These are not eyewitness testimonies from Matthew and John. I think the points you're making in a lot of what you put out there are incorrect.
Eyewitness testimony is known for having varied details.
Not varied details, contradictory details.
Oh, no, that happens all the time. That happens all the time, Blake. In fact, check out
majorly contradictions on where it happened, when it happened, and what sequence it happened.
No, first of all, please don't put your hand on the mic, okay? Because the people at home are going, stop! He's strangling the mic. Don't touch the mic. All right? Okay. You look at a detective like J. Warner Wallace, mm-hmm. okay? If you look at his work, and this isn't just him, but when you look at his work, he will say eyewitnesses always disagree.
On what?
They disagree on details.
On what kind of details?
Well, it depends on what the issue is. Is it a crime? Was he wearing a red jacket or an orange jacket?
Right, minor details.
Yeah,
Not major details, like where the resurrection happened, when it happened,
no, there are
and who was there.
Blake, let me finish, okay? There are 12 different appearances of Jesus, 12 different occasions where Jesus appears, okay? I could get the book out, but we don't have time right now, okay? 12 different occasions where Jesus appears, all right? Eyewitnesses always agree on the major event. There was a resurrection. There was a sinking of the Titanic. They're going to disagree over details. And if they didn't disagree over details, what would a skeptic like you say? Oh, they colluded. They copied from one another.
Well, you know about the synoptic problem. I know you do, but we don't have to go to that either. I'm saying, no, I understand if a detective like J. Warner Wallace, if he noticed that there were major... If I'm a detective and I get 2 eyewitness testimonies about a miraculous, any kind of event, much less miraculous, and they blatantly contradict of when it happened
and where it happened. That happens all the time, Blake. That happens all the time.
So then in what sense could these ever be falsified?
But the fact it happened is the issue. There is no testimony that we have in the New Testament that says Jesus did not rise from the dead. They all say that, okay? And the creeds go back and say the same thing. So even if you were to find contradictions, that wouldn't negate what the testimony says.
But it shows that there's just different inconsistencies in the testimony.
Well, fine. Let's say for the sake of argument, we're not talking about inerrancy now. Let's say for the sake of argument, they got some details wrong.
Matthew and
John.
Just
like these people.
Matthew and John that were at the resurrection and saw it, got details blatantly wrong.
Or they may have recorded things that we can't reconcile because they didn't give us enough information.
But the information they do give contradicts. That's what I want to talk about.
Let's say you're right, Blake. That does not disprove that they all say there was a resurrection. Just like all the news reports say that the Titanic sank. Anyway,
I'll get off.
If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian?
Yes, I was a Christian. If you started seeing that, because I know I've followed this ministry for a long time.
Okay. Why did you leave Christianity?
Because I think it's false.
Why?
Because the resurrection stories contradict. I'm going to get to I think Jesus' prophecies failed. I think Jesus is a failed Jewish apocalypticist.
Okay, so I'm just going to ask you one question,
sure.
and then we can move on.
Yes, and I'm sorry.
If Jesus didn't rise from the dead, how did an itinerant preacher from an ancient, remote part of the Roman Empire who was crucified as a criminal on a cross become the most influential human being in history?
Frank, a long answer I'm going to have to give to that one. What was happening in first century Palestine at that time?
Get your hand off the mic, please.
I'm sorry.
Step away from the mic, Blake. Okay. You can get close to it, but... Okay.
I'm not in the mic.
So,
what was the political context that was going on in first century Palestine at that time? Okay, I'm done.
Okay.
I'll be back.
So, all right. Go ahead, sir.
All right, Frank, just kidding.
What's your name?
My name Job.
Joe, go ahead.
With a B.
Job with a B?
You got it, yeah. All right.
I'm sorry, man. You had a rough life.
Not as bad as it. So, I've heard a couple different objections that I don't really know exactly how to respond all the time. But the latest one was in a debate with Alex O'Connor and David Wood. And Alex's position was basically Jesus was misunderstood. So, not that the New Testament wasn't true necessarily, but that Jesus was just a very misunderstood man. So I'd love for everyone to hear.
Well, I didn't see the debate, so I can't.
Well, just in general. So if I were to say to you, "Hey, actually, Frank, I think the New Testament is right, but I think he was misunderstood."
Misunderstood in what sense?
Like he actually wasn't claiming to be God. He was just claiming to have a special connection to God.
So when he said, "Before Abraham was born, I am," he misunderstood.
Well, when you look at like in that debate, Alex was pointing out that the way that he's using that verb isn't quite the same way that the Old Testament was using that verb.
Yeah, I don't agree. He's quoting from Exodus 3:14 when God appeared to Charlton Heston.
But he's using, right.
That's what he's quoting from.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But he's using the Greek Old Testament translation, which is not the same word as the not the same word in the same
He's
sense.
using ego eimi, which means I am.
Well,
and it's the same in the Septuagint in
Right.
Exodus 3:14 as it is in John 8:58.
Right, and what
so
he
he's quoting the same thing.
And what he points out in the debate, because that's exactly what David Wood said, he points out that there's a different word in the Greek that they would have used that would have better mirrored what the Lord Yahweh said.
Okay, well, we're getting technical now.
Absolutely.
The point is...
That's why I didn't know how to respond.
Well,
I think it's a good point. I wasn't sure what the response would be.
I guess the point is, if Jesus wasn't God, why did people keep trying to stone him?
Yeah.
Why did they kill him? They killed him.
And that Alex just kept saying, and I have friends who say, well, he's just misunderstood. They misunderstood him.
Oh,
and it's
so why did he come out and say, look, I'm not God, guys. I'm not, this is not a blasphemous claim. He never said that. Right?
Yeah, I
in
agree.
fact, he claimed to be God in so many different ways. He claimed to be God not just by his overt claims to be God, but he's actually depicted as God. In fact, if you look at the book of Mark, every chapter has him doing things only God can do, whether it's forgiving sins, healing the sick, casting out demons, walking on water, calming the seas. These are all things only Yahweh can do. And then, of course, in parables, like, for example, well, it'd take me too long to get into this. But if you look at his parables in Luke, the parable of the prodigal son and all this, Jesus is putting himself in the parable as the Father, and the Father depicts God. So when they're grumbling, why are you going after these unbelievers? He puts himself in the parable as God, and the Pharisees are the obstinate older brother who are saying, hey, you owe me, Dad. And, the prodigal goes off, and that represents whoever leaves God. God wants to go out and find them. Jesus is claiming to be God in those parables. So, and then he takes worship from people. And Alex, I saw that one part he tried to get out of that. The word doesn't tell you, unless it's in context, what it means. Like, for example, what does the word strike mean?
Multiple things.
It means multiple things, right? It could, if I'm bowling, it means something. If I'm playing baseball, it means something else. If I'm playing volleyball, it's another thing. If I'm a union guy, it means still another thing. You got to know the context in order to know what the word, how it's being used. And when people are bowing to Jesus in a religious context, they're worshiping him, even though in other places that word may be used when it's not worship. So Alex was trying to say that to
I think he skirted the
he
issue.
skirted that issue with David Wood. I saw that part, but I didn't see the whole debate.
Quick point on the contradiction thing.
Yeah.
If you'll do a DuckDuckGo, not Google, but DuckDuckGo search, you'll find harmonizing 4 Gospels. They very easily harmonize 4 things. No contradictions made. Thanks, Frank, for what you do.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Job. Thank you. All right. Yes, sir. What's your name?
My name is Mac.
Matt, go ahead.
Well, to answer
Did
your
you say
question,
Mac or Mac?
Mac, M-A-C.
M-A-C. Go ahead, Mac.
Well, I'll answer your question first.
Like Mac.
Yes, like
Okay,
the
like Mac.
like
Got it.
that
All right.
computer. Yes, I get that. I don't get that. I've never gotten that before.
All right.
I'll answer your question first. If I would become a Christian if enough evidence was presented to me.
Okay.
I am an atheist right now, though.
Okay. Why are you an atheist?
I am an atheist. Quite frankly, it's because I find the idea of an all-loving God silly.
Okay. Why?
Because I don't feel like we live in a loving universe.
Okay, but what is love?
What is love? To me, love is...
Sorry, I'm asking you questions. Go
Yeah.
ahead. You asked me a question. I'm sorry. I'm going to... All right.
I have a question for you about everyone's favorite American preacher, Joseph Smith.
Favorite American preacher?
I was being sarcastic,
Okay,
of course.
all right.
You brought up the apostles dying for a lie, quote
Yeah.
unquote. Do you think Joseph Smith was telling the truth about the golden plates?
No, of
he
course
died.
he wasn't.
He never recanted, and he was executed.
He
for
was
his
actually
belief.
shot after he tried to escape
But he never
prison.
once recanted.
Well,
Even
why
though-
would he recant? He had a
Because he
good thing
knew-
going. How many wives did he have?
I don't know, but I do know that he was under constant risk of death throughout most of his
Okay,
life
fine.
after
But
that.
you know, Mac, golden plates are not a miracle.
They are if they're given to you by an angel.
Well, but how can you prove that? See, a golden plate, I can make a golden plate in my garage if I have the right material. Okay? Notice Joseph Smith allegedly gets golden plates. What does Jesus do? Jesus does miracles in the 4 areas that cause us trouble: sin, sickness, nature, and death. In other words, Jesus is sinless. That's a problem for us. Jesus can heal sickness. That's a problem for us. Jesus can calm the storm. Nature can hurt us. And Jesus can resurrect the dead. That's our ultimate problem. He's saying he's the Messiah by doing those miracles in those 4 categories. Joseph Smith comes along with golden plates, and he's supposed to... No, sorry.
That's well, Frank, I'm afraid you've misunderstood my point.
Okay.
My point is not that Joseph Smith's miracles are equal to Jesus's. Mine are that if he could die for a lie, why couldn't the apostles?
Well, how did Joseph Smith die, do you know?
I know he was shot.
Yeah, he was in a gunfight.
Yes.
Okay. So he was trying to flee. He was trying to get away, right? He didn't want to die, okay? The apostles, on the other hand, put themselves in a position.
So did he.
What?
He stood in direct opposition to the
Okay, but he's fighting back, right? The apostles are dying for a brand new belief that they didn't believe prior to Jesus coming. And they're abandoning all those old beliefs that they had. They're adopting these new beliefs for an empirical claim that Jesus of Nazareth walked out of the tomb after being dead. They verified that with their own senses. You can have all sorts of people claiming that there's some kind of new leader like Joseph Smith, and he got a lot of benefit from being the new leader. As I said, how many wives did he have?
I don't remember.
Okay, yeah, he was doing pretty well for himself.
Yes.
You know, just follow the sex, money, and power, and you can see how people can invent a new religion. You don't find that in Christianity. They didn't get sex, money, or power. They abandoned everything they believed in, or a lot of what they believed in, and adopted all these new beliefs.
Okay, and then to add on to that, there were 3 other eyewitnesses, quote unquote, to the golden plates, 2 of which did become relatively broke and destitute towards the end of their lives, and none of them also...
Ironic that they had golden plates and they became destitute.
I know, right? But none of them ever recanted either.
Okay, look, Mac, the golden plates are not in the same category as a resurrection.
They're both
Okay,
miracles.
even if it's true. How do we know the golden plates came from the right side?
How do we know the devil didn't raise Jesus from the dead?
Because the devil doesn't have power over life. That's why. Anyway, we
So
can
who?
talk more. I got a long line, man. Thanks for coming. Hey, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian?
I already told you yes.
If I gave you a book, would you read it?
Sure. What book is it?
It's Your Best Life Now by Joel Osteen. No, Mac, it's I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist.
Oh, I've already read it. I have a copy of it on iBooks.
Oh, man. If I had Stealing from God, I'd give it to you, but I don't have it here. All right, check out Stealing from God. It's actually looks into atheism even more than I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. All right, thank you. Yes, sir, what's your name?
Hey, how's it going? So, first off, I just want to say Joseph Smith actually added 15 chapters to the end of Genesis, trying to prophesy himself as the Joseph, the patriarch. So he's a con man. I'm trying to go through the line because there's a lot that was wrong there. Every chapter of John gives the divinity of Jesus and the Trinity. You can go back to the theophanies in the Old Testament where Jesus wrestled with Jacob, met with Hagar, ate with Abraham.
Oh, there's so much in there, but we've got 2 minutes. So
yeah.
Go to your question.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to clear that. But my question is from my dad, actually, and he says...
Asking for a friend?
So he says, at what point does a believer stray so far from biblical principles that his or her salvation, whether they are true followers of Christ, is in question? For example, Calvinism, who believes in theological determinism, skewed predestination, limited atonement, etc.
Yeah, I don't think Calvinism is a heresy. I'm not a Calvinist because I wasn't predestined to be one. But I think it has certain theological problems. But the thing I love about Calvinists is they take the Bible seriously. And I think they may get some, obviously, interpretations wrong, but I think they're saved because they trust in Jesus. And that's how you get saved. You confess that Jesus is Lord. You believe in your heart and confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and God has raised him from the dead, and you will be saved. So I don't think Calvinism is something, or Arminianism or Molinism or any of these viewpoints that people have to try and reconcile God's sovereignty and man's free will. I don't think that's going to kick you out of the kingdom.
Yeah, well, just one more point. I guess my question was, for example, limited atonement is the belief that Jesus didn't die for everyone, when that's in direct contradiction with the Bible. I think it's 1 John 2:20.
Right, but the Calvinists will try and say that world doesn't mean world, it just meant the world of the elect. I don't think they're right about it, but I don't think that's something that's going to keep you from being saved.
So no salvation issue?
Yeah, I want to be accurate with our theology here. I'm not a Calvinist, but I'm going to come to the defense of Calvinists as being saved because I think they take the Bible seriously, and I think that they know what grace is, right? And that's how we are saved, and they've trusted in Christ. How they came to trust in Christ, they may disagree with someone like me, but they do trust in Christ, so they're saved.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. All right. Yes, sir, what's your name?
Hey, my name is Drew.
Drew, go ahead.
I do want to say I'm a Catholic, but I do appreciate your work because whenever I was agnostic, your work is what brought me back into Christianity.
Oh,
so
good.
I do appreciate you.
Thank you, Drew.
My question is about Marian apparitions and if you think that the validity of them contradicts Protestantism.
Not necessarily because, first of all, I haven't investigated them in any depth, but they could be true, right?
Gotcha.
You know, it could be true, and by the way, I'm not trying to be offensive, but which side did they come from?
Well, whenever you see things like, for example, Our Lady of Guadalupe, that converts 9 million people to the Catholic faith, you know, points people to Christ in over just a decade, you know, or whenever you see things like Our Lady of Zaytun, that, you know, does healings and people go there and they visit the spring and there's, you know, miraculous healings and stuff. To me, that's evidence of the Spirit, right? And
it could be, but it doesn't mean all of Catholicism's true, even if those are true.
Sure, but my question was just, do you think that invalidates Protestantism? Not necessarily.
No, not at all.
Even with the doctrine of, you know, because Protestants don't believe in intercession of the saints, you don't think that it contradicts
No, because the scriptures say that there's one mediator between God and man, that's the Lord Christ Jesus. So there's no other mediator.
Yeah, we believe that too. We believe that too as Catholics.
Well, then why would you say the saints are also mediators?
Well, it's the same way that you would ask your friend to pray for you, right? It's not that you can't go directly to God. It's just that you're asking your friend to pray for you. And in James, you see that he says, I believe it's James 2:24, that the prayers of the righteous are effective, right? So if the saints are in heaven and they're perfected, we can pray to them and ask them for intercession, and their prayers will be heard by God, right? So that's kind of
where does it say that in the scriptures?
What do you mean? Like
where does it say to pray to saints in the scriptures?
Well, you see in Revelation 5, verse 8, that the saints, you know, they hear that the saints in heaven, they hear the prayers of the saints on earth, and they are offering them up to God, right? And so a lot of this
I'd have to look at the context of that passage, so it's not coming to me right off the top of my head. But
yeah, sure. And to be fair, I mean, it is, you know, I forget the term, but, you know, you are, I think it's, you know, deducting from Scripture, right? But Protestants do that too with the Trinity. You know, the word Trinity isn't in the Bible, but also it doesn't say that women can take communion in the Bible, right? So we deduce a lot of things from Scripture. It doesn't have to explicitly say X, Y, Z for us to believe it.
Okay, but do you think Mary's a co-redemptrix?
It depends what you mean by that. And I know where you're going with this, that some popes have said that she is like co-redemptrix, but they don't mean in the sense of like that, like the role that Christ plays, right?
Let me, you know, as I say, the book that my co-author wrote, Dr. Norman Geisler, Roman Catholics and Evangelicals, we agree on a lot. There's some things we don't agree on. How are you justified?
So baptism is the initiator into the Christian life, right? And then after that, you live by faith.
Okay, so you think you have to be baptized, and then you're saved by grace through faith, and you don't need any other works. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Ephesians 2, 8 through 10. Yeah, we believe that.
Okay.
But the reason why we believe that baptism is the initiator is because, like, that's what all the early Christians believed, right? Even St. Ignatius of Antioch, he was a disciple of, you know, St. John, John that wrote the Gospel of John. He believed all these things. He believed that, you know, baptism, you needed to be baptized to be saved, right? You needed, you know, the Eucharist was a doctrine for salvation, right? It's not just a sort of side issue, that it was actually a main doctrine.
Okay, but what do you do when Paul says in 1 Corinthians 1, he says, I didn't come to baptize, I came to preach the gospel. He says, I don't even remember who I baptized. And then in Romans 1, he says, the gospel saves. So Paul seems to be bifurcating baptism and the gospel. He says the gospel saves in Romans 1, and in 1 Corinthians 1, he says, I didn't come to baptize, I came to preach the gospel.
Well, is baptism not part of the gospel? Like Christ himself said that, you know, you need to be born of water and of spirit.
Well, that's a very disputed passage as to whether that means baptism or not, okay?
Well, what else could it mean then?
When Paul separates baptism and the gospel in 1 Corinthians, chapter 1. He's saying that the baptism is not part of the gospel. Baptism is what you do in response to the gospel, but it's not the gospel.
So in your view, would baptism just be a symbol then? It wouldn't be an actually...
it's a sign that you are saved, yes.
Okay, gotcha.
So now, look, am I going to say that you're not a believer because you believe baptism? No, I'm not going to say that. You know, it's something we can dispute, all right? But let me just ask you one question, Drew, then we got a long line.
Yeah.
And I just want your opinion on this.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to give you a gotcha or anything.
I gotcha.
I've been to hundreds of masses in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I have never, ever heard a pastor or priest mention grace or the gospel in a homily, except for the last mass I went to, and that was my father's funeral. When the priest came out and said, I talked to Frank the other day, and he's accepted Jesus as his Lord and Savior, so he's in heaven. Tell me, maybe this is just my experience, but tell me why in my entire life of going to Catholic Church, and I paid attention, I have never heard the gospel in a sermon.
Never? You never heard the readings that they give every Sunday?
Not talking about the readings.
Okay.
Because, you know, Jimmy Aiken, my friend who's a Catholic apologist, will say, well, it's, you know, the gospel's in the Mass. Okay, fine. That's not my question. Why don't priests talk about it?
Well, I think they do, right? I think that just because, and I'm sorry that, you didn't get that experience out of Mass, but I think there were a lot of Catholics who would say that, yeah, they do get that experience out of Mass, right? And you even said this in your presentation too, that, just because sometimes, like, we as believers don't play Jesus perfectly, it doesn't invalidate the claims.
Oh, no. I agree with you 100%. I'm just saying I do not see grace preached from the pulpit at Catholic services. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. Well,
I appreciate you, man.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Appreciate you.
All
Thank
right,
you.
God bless you.
Appreciate it.
Let's keep going. Hey, are you from Wisconsin?
No, I'm from New York.
Okay, good. Go ahead. What's your name?
I'm Reagan.
Reagan, go ahead.
I was wondering, what is your response to Christians who say it is not their place to be involved in their government or attempt to legislate morality with a biblical view?
I'd say they're disobeying the scriptures and disobeying natural law. Paul said, love your neighbor. How are you supposed to love your neighbor if you have the opportunity to love your neighbor by protecting him or her from evil and you don't take it?
That answers that.
All right, there you
Thank
go.
you.
Thank you. Yes, sir. What's your name?
I'm Isaac.
Isaac, go ahead.
Okay, so I came in when we were at the segment about your truth versus the truth.
Yeah.
And so that reminded me of a friend of mine. So he
asking for a friend. Here he is again.
There you go. So he claims he's a Christian, but his lifestyle and his attitude are very hedonistic and unchristian, you know? And his perspective is very warped on just what is the truth and what isn't, and almost on Christianity too.
Okay.
And so I was just wondering, how should I approach trying to reach him about the absolute truth rather than his truth?
Well, I would ask him, when he says he's a Christian, what does he mean by that? Just ask him, when you say you're a Christian, what does that mean to you?
Yeah.
When how do you describe what a Christian is? And see what he says, and then just go from there.
Absolutely.
Because asking questions is easy, answering them is hard. And don't assume you know. Just keep asking questions. What do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion? Why do you think that's true? When you say you're a Christian, are you following the commands of Jesus? Because Jesus said, if you love me, you'll follow my commandments. Are you following them?
Trying to.
No, I mean, I would ask him.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not putting you on the spot.
Thank you.
All right, so keep asking questions. Yes, sir. Go ahead. What's your name?
How you doing, Frank?
Good.
My name's
How you
Will.
doing? What's your name?
Will.
Will, go ahead.
So first off, I just want to thank you for everything that you do. You've impacted my walk with Christ
Oh, thanks,
tremendously,
brother.
and one of the pioneers who has led me into apologetics. So
Oh,
I just wanna
good.
thank you for that. Learning about the nature of God is very intriguing to me, and I wanted to know what your thoughts were on Molinism and how that relates to God, knowing all possible contingencies. Like, for example, Joseph in the Bible being sold into slavery by his brothers. This might be more of a speculative question, but I think about God, being outside of time and being able to, see the end from the beginning. Could it be said that, God, knowing that happens, but knows a different situation where that doesn't happen and decides to choose, that situation where it wouldn't happen? I don't know if that
Yeah, I
makes
think
sense.
that God knows all possible contingencies. He knew what would happen if we existed in other circumstances, in other words. If God is all-knowing, then that seems to be true. And William Lane Craig, whom Anna had here, 4 or 5 years ago, is a big proponent of that. And if you go to his website, reasonablefaith.org, he'll have articles and different things you can look at. I think that makes sense, that God knows all different possible contingencies. And so when God elects to create a universe, since he knows everything, he knows how it's going to turn out. But that doesn't mean he's causing it to turn out in a deterministic way. Just because he knows what's going to happen doesn't mean he's causing it to happen. Just like we might know the sun's going to rise in the east tomorrow, but we're not causing it to rise in the east, right? Knowledge does not imply causation. So I think that's one way to reconcile this idea that God is sovereign and man has free will. When God elects to create a universe, he's electing the outcome, but he's not forcing the outcome. He's just allowing it to play out. And he may intervene, of course, through miracles and God's providence and that kind of thing, but he's not overriding human free will to do so. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Something else I think about, though, if there were a different situation that somebody was put in, and him knowing that, could it be that he decides to, create that universe instead? If that makes sense.
Well, we don't know why, other than he says, I created for my pleasure. And for my glory. We don't know why he created this universe as opposed to another universe where, say, the Dallas Cowboys didn't exist, because that would have been a better universe. Right?
Yes, sir.
I thought so, yeah. I don't know, why did he create this universe and not another? We don't know, right?
Yes,
but we're in this one, so we got to make the best of it, right?
All
right. Thanks, Will.
Yes, sir.
All right. Hey, what's your name?
Gavin.
What's it?
Gavin.
Gavin, go ahead.
Yes, sir. I have a clarifying question for the question that Judah asked you. So you agree that the time statements that are written in the Olivet Discourse are true and realistic for the people of that time? And when you talk about a future fulfillment, are you talking about a language that in Matthew 24 involves God coming on a cloud and the passing of the heaven and the earth? If so, could this language here be associated with other scripture that uses this language to refer to a time of judgment and the passing of the old covenant system?
Yeah, exactly, Gavin. That's what's going on. Because if you read when he says, the sun won't give its light, the moon will go dark, the stars will fall from the sky, people will say, well, that didn't happen in 70 AD. Whenever you see a passage quoted in the New Testament, you got to go back and see how it was used in the Old Testament. And what Matthew is doing there is he's quoting Isaiah 13. And there's a period of judgment that Isaiah is talking about in Isaiah 13, and he's using that same language. The stars will fall from the sky, the sun won't give its light, whatever, right?
So
it didn't happen literally in the Old Testament when that judgment came. He's just using apocalyptic language to say it's going to be a terrible time. And so when he says it referring to 70 AD or even the end times, he's not talking about a literal falling of the stars from the sky. It's just a apocalyptic way of saying it's going to be a disaster.
Yeah. So my final question, using that and you agreeing that does have something to do with judgment and the end of the old covenant system, how does that suggest that there will be any other fulfillment past that one in 70 AD, like a final fulfillment that you say, a future fulfillment?
Well, because I think that there is a sense in which some of the things that he talks about, and again, we'd have to read the whole thing. I don't have it all memorized. It hasn't come to complete fruition yet, And by the way, when it says riding the clouds, if you look at Isaiah 19, Yahweh rides the cloud in judgment. And so he's using Old Testament language to talk about a terrible time. I don't think Jesus has completely come back yet, right? I think he came in judgment in 70 AD, but he hasn't come back and done what Revelation says. In fact, some have said this. Do you know that the 3 synoptic gospels have somewhat of an Olivet Discourse in it? John doesn't. Why not? Because his Olivet Discourse is the book of Revelation. All right.
Yeah. And you date that pre-70 AD Revelation?
I think it's pre-70 AD.
Yes,
even if it's 90, it's still, he's talking about a future period, obviously.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, if you date that pre-70 AD, that future period could be 70 AD, correct?
Some of it, but Jesus, I'm not a preterist. You know what a preterist is?
Yes, sir, I do.
Are you a preterist?
Are
you a partial preterist?
I would say so, yes.
A partial, okay, partial's okay. But full preterist, like everything has happened and Jesus isn't coming back, that's a heresy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Just so you know.
No, that was
okay.
I'm a student of the word.
All right. Okay. All right.
Yeah,
now, by the way, look. Let me say one thing about end times. I think end times are just like what happened when Jesus came the first time. You know what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 2 about Jesus coming the first time? These things were hidden because if the rulers of this earth knew, they never would have crucified the Lord of glory. In other words, when you look at the Old Testament prophecies, before Jesus comes, I don't think you can really figure out what's going to happen because they're scattered all over the Old Testament, right? Mm-hmm. But as soon as the New Testament comes, the New Testament serves as the box top to the jigsaw puzzle of the Old Testament. And once you get the New Testament, you go, oh, now I see how Isaiah 9 and Isaiah 7 and Isaiah 9 or Daniel 9 and Micah 5:2 and Malachi 3 and how all these fit together. I couldn't see it beforehand by design. Because if you could see it beforehand, Satan never would have instigated the death of Jesus. Mm-hmm. He thought the death of Jesus was victory. It turned out to be defeat. I think the same thing is true with the second coming. I think God doesn't want us to know exactly when he's coming back. In fact, he says, I'm going to come like a thief in the night. Yeah. If we knew that he was coming back in, say, 2034, what would we be doing? We'd be going, I got time, right? 2033, I'll start thinking about it. I'll run up the credit cards, and then I'll repent, right? No, I think, and someone was saying before about soon and all this, those were, God's going to come imminently at any point. Nothing has to happen on the prophetic calendar for God to come. We don't know when he's coming. Yeah. So we're always ready.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
For that. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thanks, Gavin. Blake, don't touch the mic.
Okay, I won't
Go ahead.
All right, I'm going to try and talk a little bit slower this time. Mm-hmm. And perfect segue into what we were just talking about. So I want to specifically tie it into some of the epistemology that you apply, and you and Geisler apply, and I don't have a faith to be an atheist. So on page 233, you and Geisler say, the inclusion of miracles does not negate the historicity of the New Testament documents, but may actually strengthen the historicity because they record predicted events. A few pages later, you're giving an anecdote where you ask a non-Christian a rhetorical question, and you go, what possible motive did the New Testament writers have to make up the resurrection story if it wasn't true? And then you use similar rhetorical questions throughout the rest of the book. How would you respond, though? It's not just the Olivet Discourse. There's a myriad of New Testament passages that, when taken within their context, seem to demonstrate the failed apocalypticism of Christianity. And I know, for sake of time, I'm not going to go through all of them, but it's just even starting with Paul. In 1 Thessalonians 4:15, he goes, for this we declare to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will by no means precede those who have died. For the Lord himself, with a cry of command, with the archangel's call, and with the sound of God's trumpets, will descend from heaven, and the dead in Christ will rise first. And this is Paul writing to the church at Thessalonica, right? Then we who are still alive, who are left, will be caught up in the clouds together, and we will meet the Lord in the air. So we will be with the Lord forever. Sure, yeah. Seeming to imply that Paul is telling the church at Thessalonica, some of them are still going to be alive when Jesus comes back. Just two more, if you'll indulge me.
Well, let's just stay on that one for a second.
Okay. I think there's 12 different ones in the New Testament, but we'll stick with that one.
First of all, we don't have time to go through them all.
I understand.
I think Paul is not just writing to the church at Thessalonica. I can't even pronounce that because I already should be in bed, okay, right now. But anyway. Paul is writing to all believers. Of course, he's initially writing to that church there. And Paul is talking about the second coming. When Jesus comes back, we're going to meet him in the air, and then the dead in Christ will rise. This is, by the way, a great funeral passage. 1 Thessalonians 4, verses 13 to 18. I don't see any contradiction there. And let's say, for the sake of argument, Paul thought Jesus was coming back sooner. Let's say he's got that wrong. Does that mean Jesus didn't rise from the dead?
But you gotta let me answer.
I'm gonna electrify that thing, man.
Sorry, hands are off. Hands are off. Fair enough.
Okay, yeah. Go ahead.
I'm a hand talker. I apologize.
All right.
So then in 1 Corinthians, I believe it's 7, he does say that he's getting this imminent return from Jesus, from a word of the Lord. So that would create problems with this whole notion of Paul is having direct contact with Jesus, and then we see in 1 Peter.
Okay, hold on. Okay, Blake. this is something we need to sit down and look at every passage and see the context, okay? You seem really hell-bent, forgive the expression, on trying to disprove Christianity. Why?
So I don't think that's respectful. I am trying to get valid answers. And to be honest, I'll be 100% honest, Frank. I follow this ministry for a long time. I don't think I'm changing your mind, what you do. No vitriolic response, none of that. No. I think a lot of what you do, though, paints caricatures of atheists and what atheists actually think and why people leave the faith. And a lot of people, and especially when I first became a Christian, were not exposed to the arguments from the other side. And I don't think you always fairly represent the other side. And I think the failed apocalypticism, as I think a lot of scholars that are not at specific seminaries, they are aware of these arguments, and I think it is a huge problem. And I say it epistemically, too, because in your book, you talk about prediction being evidence for Christianity, right? Predictions from the Old Testament of Jesus fulfilling that. But then what happens when these prophecies fail in the New Testament is they get reinterpreted, or things get read into the text, or I think they are determined to be metaphorical or spiritual. And we see this in a lot of
okay, Blake, all right,
can I please finish? And I think what's happening is you're making predictions unfalsifiable. And as I think you would agree, any hypothesis that is unfalsifiable isn't actually providing, there's no evidence based on an outcome. It's heads I win, tails you lose. You can't disprove it. And
okay.
That's it.
Yeah. What's your motivation for doing this?
Frank, I think that's disingenuous. I want to actually talk about what is in this, and you're asking about my motivation.
Blake, hold on. You can't get in front of a microphone and bring up 12 problems.
If
it's not a debate.
One problem.
Okay, we dealt with one of them, maybe two of them. 1 Thessalonians, whatever you brought up, okay?
Can I ask a specific question? Like epistemic question.
Go ahead.
How would you know if these prophecies are wrong? In what way could these predictions ever be disproven? That's my question.
What predictions?
The predictions of the New Testament that Jesus was coming back.
Well, we can't disprove them because he hasn't come back yet. Okay.
But you're assuming we're making a circular argument because we're assuming our conclusion that it is true.
Blake, hold on. I don't even know if we make a case, and I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, that Jesus coming back is giving us evidence for Christianity. Mm-hmm. We're focused in on truth, God, miracles, Jesus rising from the dead. You understand that, right?
Truth,
okay, so the next question you need to deal with, which is sort of questions you're bringing up, we're trying to show that the Bible's true. The next question is, what does the Bible say?
Yeah.
We don't deal with that, and I don't have enough faith to be an atheist to a great degree, okay? Because, look, the book's already too long, okay? We're just trying to show the basic argument as to why we think it's true. Okay. Let's say it's not inerrant. I think it is, but let's say it's not.
If Jesus failed to come back...
Is this inerrant? No, it's not inerrant. But did the Titanic sink? Yes. You wouldn't have documents written by Jews in the first century claiming a man claimed to be God and rose from the dead unless that really happened because they paid with their lives for it.
Okay, last part. Let's transition to that. Was there not a strong desire among Jewish people at the time for a messianic figure?
Yeah, there's at least 20 different messiahs. They're all dead.
Was there not an expectation within that political culture of a Messiah coming to save them from Roman oppression?
Exactly, and Jesus didn't do it.
I agree.
So why do they claim he's the Messiah if Jesus didn't do what they wanted him to do?
Are you aware?
Because he rose from the dead.
Okay, and I think it can be explained through cognitive dissonance theory that applies to certain groups. Thank you for your time, Frank. I appreciate
thank you, Blake. Job!
I'm back.
We're back to more suffering. Go ahead.
First that was the suffering.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, wouldn't you say it's kind of God to choose you, even though you don't believe that he predestinately chose you? But anyway, we won't talk about Calvinism. My real question...
We're not predestined to. Go ahead.
My real question is this idea of truth existing. Mm-hmm. So let's say someone accepts that. Just to be clear, I'm a Christian. I'm a Calvinist. These are questions that I truly want to figure out how to answer
by the way,
with other people.
Anna, come on up here, please. I want you to see how sharp this woman is because she's going to take the next 3 questions.
So
she's very sharp, trust me.
I believe it.
Go ahead.
When it comes to, so truth exists, but the argument I've gotten from my sister-in-law who was here tonight and isn't a Christian, so if you want to pray for somebody, pray for my sister-in-law who is here, and hopefully the Holy Spirit will awaken her. She says, yeah, truth exists, but we can't know it. It's kind of like the blind man and the elephant. everybody's got a piece of it. And my response was, well, but you're assuming you can see all the blind men groping on the elephant, which is always how I've known to squash that argument. And she said, oh, no, I think I'm one of the blind men just like you.
She's humble.
Well, yes and no, right? But she thinks she's the blind man that can see. And I don't know what to do in that moment other than repeat myself. So I would love to hear how you would respond to that.
First of all, she's asserted that we can know that we can't see.
Yes.
How does she know that?
Right. That was what I said. And she's saying that's just her position, and she'd like to be disproven. She'd be happy to be disproven. And I thought, I don't know how to disprove. It's kind of like what Blake's position was of, seems like an unfalsifiable claim.
That she just can't see truth?
Right. Without no one, that it's not possible for anyone to know all of the truth.
Oh, I would agree with her that it's not possible for everyone to know all of the truth. But we can know truth that is given to us by the truth giver. So we can apprehend the truth. We can't comprehend the truth. We can see what is true. For example, steal her wallet. Then ask her what happened.
Well, I mean, she would want to. Obviously, that's a totally different scenario. Then is the Bible true?
Right.
Right. So it's not just in general. Because I tried well, your husband's a doctor.
Sure.
Does he think the things in his doctor books? That's what they're called officially, I think. In his doctor books, does he think they're true?
I mean, it's clinical, yeah.
Obviously.
Yeah.
And she said, yeah. I mean, those are true, but I'm talking about spiritual things.
Sure.
And so she did this, and I thought, so how do you? Right. That's kind of what I'm going to do is like say, yeah, but you're creating a false dichotomy here, in my opinion.
Does she require this to be answered in order to believe in Jesus?
Yeah, that's basically why she doesn't accept Christianity, as far as I understand it. Is I don't accept Christianity because I can't know for sure that the Bible is true.
What I would probably ask is what criteria will she accept for truth? And then I would start bringing out manuscripts, which we have.
Right.
So, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I can put this in my pocket. I would ask her what criteria she requires. And if she can't come up with a criteria, I would work with her to try to figure out what that is, because she wouldn't be conversing if she didn't have some knowledge of the truth. So it's not total blindness.
I see. So create success criteria within her own parameters,
yeah,
and then address those.
Work with her the same way that Christ works with us when we also cannot see.
Sovereignly, right, Frank?
Yes.
I think God is so sovereign that he can get his will done through our free will.
Isn't it amazing, like how he used Joseph's brothers, where he says, Joseph, your brothers planned this, but God planned it.
Yes.
Yeah.
See, I graduated from Reformed Theological Seminary.
Yes, you know.
He was sovereignly predestined to work with me.
Exactly.
See? Look at that.
That's helpful. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Joe.
Hey there. So
from the tribe of Judah, remember?
Yes. You mentioned preterism earlier. Not you, of course, but Dr. Frank.
She can handle it.
You got this. So full preterism is what I have come to just discover and just start to believe, I guess. Yeah, it's growing a lot, which is interesting because I think so many people have questions about the end times, and they think it's this red heifer getting sacrificed in Texas, and that's flown in from Texas to Jerusalem, which is weird. But if full preterism were true, what is wrong with that?
Functionally speaking, full preterism teaches that every single end time event has already occurred, which means Jesus has already come back, and yet sin is present in the world. That's a significant problem.
So where, in biblical prophecy, where is sin eradicated completely? Because where I see it in Revelation, I think it's 21 and 22. You have this New Jerusalem, but outside of this New Jerusalem, there's still wickedness, or it says idolatry, all this stuff. So if this end of all things is not a utopia, then where is the evidence and the exegesis for a utopia at the end?
In my experience, the problem is with hermeneutics. Do you know what that is already, so that I'm not
Absolutely.
being annoying?
Yes.
So that we finish out. The reason why is because full preterism wants to take a literalist application until we get to the 1,000 years of reigning,
I would disagree with the literalism, but
That's okay. But
sure,
for
go
the most-
ahead.
It's a 1-to-1 ratio, right?
Sure.
We have a one event to one
Sure.
verse moment. Then we have the 1,000-year reign. Christ has already come back, and way more than 1,000 years has occurred since that point.
Sure.
That's a problem.
Where's
the
the
new
problem?
heavens and the new earth have not been remade. That's
So,
the problem.
new heavens and new earth. That's a great point. The heavens and the earth in the Old Testament was referred to as Jerusalem. They were in Jeremiah. Hear, O heavens, see, O earth, and hear my voice and listen to this prophecy I'm about to give you. So when we're speaking of heavens and earth, if there's somebody reading the book of Revelation, they would think covenant. They would think this represents the covenant. And this establishment of the new covenant at the end of Revelation, I would take to be at the destruction of Jerusalem, where the old covenant is destroyed, the new covenant is fully placed in, and now we live in no more death, no more sorrow in Christ, as the whole New Testament says.
It's a good attempt. I am not great at eschatology because I hate it.
Yeah,
If I can be completely
it's a
honest.
lengthy,
That's okay.
it's a very
I find
lengthy
it-
thing.
I find it really interesting though, because that sounds like an amillennial full preterist, what you just described.
It's
Just-
full, yeah, it's just full.
Just full preterist, but
Yeah.
that there are these symbolic moments that's why we're not in a new heavens and new earth. I am totally okay. Do you believe in Jesus Christ as our only Messiah through faith
Absolutely,
and grace?
yes.
I am totally okay with you and I debating eschatology in heaven when I'm actually interested in this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, forgive me. I am just not a good apologist with eschatology because I can't stand it. So I'm
Okay.
sorry that I don't know, but that was the best.
I get
attempt
that
I have
answer
to
a
do.
lot, but thank
It's
you.
okay. It's
I
right up
appreciate
there.
it.
Anybody has any questions on the age of the earth?
Hmm.
I'm not interested.
Mhm.
I'm not sure.
I would challenge you though that these kids are asking these questions.
They absolutely are, which is why we taught an entire year on eschatology at my expense.
But you're not interested.
No, I'm interested because they're interested. I just can't stand it as a personal preference, which is why I'm okay with waiting until heaven to find out which one of us is correct.
Yeah.
Thanks, Judah.
So that makes.
Let's keep moving.
Sorry, I'm disappointing, Judah.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm William. Sorry, I'm not a very good public speaker, and I don't normally do this. But I want to thank you for your time. When Blake was talking and he asked, he brought up things that I don't know scripture as well as he does, but with contradictions being there, and then I feel like it sort of gets pushed away from. Well, we're not. Even if it's true, we're not going to worry about that because it's about the resurrection. But if we're only getting the resurrection from the Gospels, and you're picking and choosing what is true and what is not true, if you want to step past any possible contradictions that may or may not be there, and say, no, just focus on the resurrections, that's what's important. But it's the resurrection. This is all coming from these Gospels. The resurrection is coming from them, from the Bible. And if there's problems in the Bible, that needs to be addressed. That shouldn't just be sort of sidestepped and said, no, don't worry about that. It's a Titanic. They got it wrong.
Let me speak to that because I brought that up.
Real quick, if I could just finish. I'm so sorry
yeah,
because
go ahead.
this is really tough for me. So if I don't get it out, it's not coming out.
Well done. No problem.
My understanding, and I'm 20 odd years out of date, but Mark is the oldest gospel that we have a copy of, if that's still relevant. But that's, to my knowledge, is like 40 CE is the earliest copy we have of Mark. And then it's like Matthew, Luke, and John, and Luke and Acts, if I remember, those are written by the same author. But as far as them being eyewitness testimonies, now what was the literacy rate of Jesus' followers? What was the literacy rate of those people at the time? Who could read and write? I know Paul could read and write. He can read and write in Greek. But as far as the rest of his followers, who could read and write?
Estimates are 10%.
10%? How many followers did he have?
Well, he had at least
12,
12,
right?
but
Hold on. 10% of the 12.
Yeah.
But, one and a half?
As far as the extra biblical evidence that we have for his followers, he had hundreds, and many of them were very heavily trained. So we have a list of the 70 that
Matthew, Mark, was there one more than one? Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John? Because you said their names are on the first page. That one didn't have it. It must have fallen off. So I'm just confused in regards to eyewitness testimony of the Gospels.
Okay.
If it's 40 CE, the average lifespan around this time I think was 33, 36 years. 70, he's dying 33 years old. If it starts from C, that's 33. I call it AD. But so the math gets wonky in my head. Is it eyewitness? Did those people write these things? If they did, if they got things wrong, why then do we want to set that aside, but we focus on the other thing?
Let me just go back
Please,
to the original point, because what I want to say, the reason I'm bringing up the Titanic is because the main point is that I'm making in this presentation is that Jesus rose from the dead. Okay, I'm not going all the way to the Bible's inerrant because we can't do that in an hour and a half. All right, there have been books. My co-author wrote a book called The Big Book of Bible Difficulties. It has 800 of these alleged problems in the Bible, and he gives harmonizations for these alleged contradictions. My point is, for the sake of argument, let me grant you that there are contradictions. I don't think this is true, but for the sake of argument, let me grant you there are contradictions in the details. Does that negate the larger point?
It should bring it into question, because that's the only source we have.
No.
Who else? And this,
we have tons of sources.
One other thing real quick. You ended your point with, well, they died for it, so it must be true. They were willing to die for it. I remember the cult Haley Bob, and they all castrated themselves and they murdered themselves because they believed in it. Did that make what they believed true? A willingness to die for something does not make it true.
No, but you see,
Right.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
You're right, but a willingness for thousands of people to die over and over and over again for testimony they claimed to have seen themselves is different than the Hail Bob cult.
But Paul didn't even meet Jesus in the life and during his life. He's getting it all secondhand.
According to him, he did meet Jesus.
No, he didn't. He saw the Pharisees. He was prosecuting Christians. There were no Christians before Christ died.
Here's who you need. Can I give you this?
Sure, please.
The non-Christian sources for the resurrection, like Pliny the Younger, or Josephus. But just hear me out. Hear me out.
I'm hearing you, but those guys are not great. Just like they want to get published, like people today want to get published.
Fair
All
enough.
this calls into question, and when something's so huge, it is. I'm sorry. I will go back, and it's been 25 years.
No, it's good. We are the questioning people. That's why we're here.
But these things should not. His stuff should not get pushed to the side so quick.
Can I draw a distinction between the Hail Bob people and the Christians?
Please.
The Hail Bob people died for a claim they couldn't verify or falsify.
So did the Christians.
No. The Christians are dying for a claim they verified with their
Perpetua
own
and Felicitas, two martyrs, very famous.
Hey, hold on. Can I complete the thought?
Sure, yes.
Okay. What I'm saying is the people that died as Christians said they saw the resurrected Jesus with their own eyes. They handled him, they ate with him, they touched him. The Hail Bob Comet people are not dying for an empirical claim. They're dying for some belief that they can't verify or falsify. The Christians saying they're dying for an empirical claim they can verify and did verify.
But again, the empirical claim, that evidence comes through the Bible itself. Nobody's worshiping Pliny the Younger. Nobody's putting that weight on there. And we're not. I just want to bring that up because I felt when Blake brought up some good points, that got pushed aside. And I think if you're going to, you talked about this being eyewitness testimony, you talked about it being a trauma event. These things that you use, these punctuation points that are very good and they get attention. And I hear a lot of assessment and people saying, yeah. But when these other things come up and there's difficulty and dissension, I hear a lot of grumbling behind me. And I hear a lot of things, well, we just don't, come on, move on. This isn't.
I'm not saying move on. We just can't cover them all here.
But I do think those things need more time.
If it helps you, after Blake's first question, I walked back, invited Blake to sit with me for, if he will, no pressure, because I'm a manuscript person, and I'm happy to go over them because I have them on my phone.
I think that should be recorded and also put on your channel.
And if we can do something like
I
that,
have one more last
we
question.
will.
It's a morality thing.
Go in front of the mic if you would.
I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
The ethics and the morality question. I think you keep this notion that morality only comes through if God exists. So if I prove to you that God does not exist, if there is no God, if we take that as a question, will you start doing immoral things?
There's nothing immoral if God doesn't
exist.
exist.
No, sir, there's things that everyone can say, any human being can say, murdering a child is immoral. You don't need a sky bully to determine that.
A sky what?
A sky bully.
A sky bully.
Phrase.
A sky bully.
A sky bully. You don't need God to tell you that to murder a child is immoral. And if you do, you need to ask yourself some really hard questions.
Why is a child worth anything objectively if there's no God?
Because why do you take everything good? Why you want to worship a God that created a universe where everything that exists in it has to consume something else that is alive and does not want to die?
Why is that bad?
It's awful.
Why?
It's a nightmare. everything we eat, all these things, and you want to say, why is that bad? I don't know how to help you if you're going to ask that question. That's not, of course, it's an awful nightmare universe that we find ourselves. And these good things that we've created, you continue to strip away from humanity, and you give all grace, all due to God. All right. So my question again, ask me, you notion you're sidestepping the question, sir. It wouldn't be immoral. So you would murder and rape and kill.
No, I'm not saying that.
You're saying it wouldn't be immoral.
What I'm asking you is, what's your ontological foundation for morality?
My ontological foundation is we are a collective people who have to live together. And if I hurt you, you're going to want to hurt me. And my safety lies in treating you with respect and love.
No, it doesn't.
Yes, it does.
No,
it absolutely does.
No.
If I go into my neighbor's, my amazing neighbor who invited me to come here, if I break into his house every day and take his stuff,
let me ask you a question.
We place laws on that, of course. But you say that morality does not exist without God.
Can I try?
Go.
So again, I asked the question: would you do these acts if I could prove to you? So why not?
Because I believe that there's a universal morality that is self-evident that I think you're accessing, and that's what you're referencing.
And you want to call that God?
Yes.
And I want to call it something else.
That's okay with me.
The problem is when I call it something else,
God can handle semantics.
People can't. People can't handle what religion does. People can't handle what God does. Those people who believe what they do in that name, what they have done all through the time since it began, they can't. There is something that needs to be left behind. It needs to be moved beyond.
What would you suggest? What's the something?
What is the something? I don't know. I'm not very smart. But I do know what it is not good. And this continuing publishing and pushing and doing it, it helps people, but it also limits people. And I don't know what the answer is, but to totally negate, and as an atheist, I would say if Jesus Christ came down tomorrow and stood in front of me, I still would not accept him. My understanding of Christianity, love thy neighbor and accept Jesus Christ as Lord. I got no problem with the first one. It's the second one. Because some man has Jesus who could change these things, these pains that we live through every day, all over the world. A God who is all good and all omnipotent could change whatever he wants to do, chooses not to for whatever reason that I can't know.
He loves us. And
he doesn't love us.
The thing that you're referencing that you can't put your finger on is sin.
That's not love.
No, the thing that you need to leave behind.
Why did God create sin?
He didn't create it.
Sin doesn't. Something existed God, in this universe that God didn't create?
Correct. Sin is not a substance. Sin is the absence of God. It has to be present in order for love to exist.
No, the sin is the thing that it was created to have a reason. Why did they continue on with it after Jesus died? Because it brought them status. It brought them these things. When you have control of a population, that's a good thing. You talked about Joseph.
Oh my gosh, you're right there, dude. You are right there.
Oh,
you're so no. Seriously, you're right there.
I'm honest. As far as this notion that there is no, it's a horrible concept.
Okay, which one?
God and Jesus.
Okay, all of it is a horrible concept.
Yes,
what are we going to do with it? What are you suggesting?
Walk away.
Walk away from it?
Yes.
To what end?
I don't know. You don't need.
I don't know. Doesn't work for me because we're actually. I have something that I'm offering as a solution. I don't know is not a solution. You're just offering. I don't know, which is humble but unhelpful.
Quiet in the world and marvel through the world, marching without doing awful things, without being worried about sin or my future soul.
So here's what we'll do.
So and a lot of other people do as well, and particularly in the South, it's not really a great thing to be.
You're right. That's true. It's really miserable. But I'll make you a deal. I'll hang on to my something for now, and when you come up with one better, I'll take you up on it.
The problem is it's not coming up with something better. It's the problem that you want to put your thing on me.
Just like you're doing with me and everyone in this room.
I guess to a point I am for this discussion.
You absolutely are, because you're trying to convince me. This is good. This is intellectual.
You guys, this is pointless. This is what you guys do. This is your thing. This brings your life meaning, and this is the thing. I'm not talking to you guys, really. I guess maybe I'm talking to the rest of the room, and maybe I'm talking to support of Blake, who I kind of felt like got kind of a little...
Could we give him a round of applause for being as brave as he is, please? Thank you.
But this was, I don't like to speak in front of people, but I would feel bad if I didn't say the things I said. And I would worry about that.
You did great. When you come up with something better, I'll listen.
No, I don't.
Hi, Matt.
Hello. It's good to see you.
Thank you, though.
Oh boy, so much. I had another question, but then I heard so much, and I have so many more now. But I'll stick to
Mac is brilliant. He's one of the students that comes to RC and does a really good job.
So I'm going to ask this question because It's from my little brother, who's also an atheist.
Okay.
And it's his response to the cosmological argument. So the question comes up in the cosmological argument, how can something come from nothing? And he answers that by saying, because nothing is stopping it. In essence, his response to the cosmological argument is, the way in which something comes from nothing is because in nothing there are no rules saying that something cannot come from nothing.
There being no rules saying that something cannot come from nothing is a rule.
No, it's not. Okay, so that I agree with that. There's nothing. So if there's nothing, what stops something from something coming from nothing?
Forgive me, I'm not following the question. It might be my fault.
There's nothing.
Yeah.
That's a pre-existent state.
Yeah.
And there's something. What's stopping nothing from becoming something?
I'm not sure. What are you getting at? What's your solution to that question?
Oh, I have nothing. I think something can come from nothing.
Are you under the impression that the something that we're talking about is God, that he
I'm
also
saying,
came out of
no, I'm
nothing?
saying that the universe, okay. So how did the universe come from nothing? It is because nothing was stopping it. Stopping the universe from coming into being.
That's attributing nothing to being a thing, and it's not a thing.
Exactly.
It is nothing. It is absolutely nothing, no rules.
Yeah, no rules.
No thing.
No rules.
It's not-
Is your brother close by?
No, he's in Dallas, Texas.
Man, I was gonna say bring him. Oh, he's in Dallas. We have a Ratio Christi chapter. Can I send him there instead? Because I don't know if it's too late and I'm not following, but that whole thing, I don't. Ex nihilo. That is what we teach.
Ex nihilo?
That God created out of nothing.
Yeah.
That the substance that created was God.
Yeah.
Nothingness did not produce something. Something who is God produced something.
Okay, so I don't necessarily agree with what he is saying. This is just his argument, and it is that something can come from nothing because in nothing there are no rules.
Why doesn't everything come into existence?
Because there's something now.
My impression is that physicists have been trying to prove mathematically that that's a thing that can happen for a long time, and they haven't succeeded at it yet, and they've genuinely been trying because people want an origin of the universe that doesn't rely on the kind of motive force that he presented, because that's one of the main evidences for God that apologists present. So physicists really have been trying to work on the maths for that, and they haven't discovered anything that can verify that that could happen. What you're really presenting here is a philosophical argument that's unfalsifiable, whereas...
Well, so's the God hypothesis.
Okay, hold on. Because I know you, and because these lovely people need to go home and they came not to hear me, they came to hear Frank Turek, will you table that question for me to suffer through, to figure out in my mind how I could possibly get my mind around it, or head to our vice president, who knows more about physics than I do, and duke it out, my dude.
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate you immensely.
Put it on a podcast.
Well, you know what? There actually is one. If you're interested in hearing me wax eloquent on some of these things, that can be arranged. You just Google my name, and it's right there, and everything's for free, and all of my Q&A's there too. You can come to mine.
I had hoped we were out of questions, but hope is here.
Can we say last two questions of the night?
All right, this is it.
You had to do that. I'm playing. Okay. Well, it's
to the mic. Get close to the mic. Yeah, go ahead.
Am I close enough?
Yeah, you go ahead.
Okay, cool. It's more so just a couple things to mention. The resurrection accounts, they are accurate. Like, if you're gonna have
Thank you.
if you're gonna have an actual eyewitness account, you're probably not going to record every little thing. Just as John mentioned, there are many things that Jesus did, but there's too much to record.
Right. It's not supposed to be an exhaustive analysis. It's supposed to give us what we need to know.
Exactly,
Well
exactly.
done.
But John is the only person to say that. Matthew, Mark, Luke didn't say that.
They're not talking to all people. John is. Matthew's audience isn't everybody.
No, I'm not pulling up an objection. I'm just mentioning that John mentioned this. Now, when they talk about how Jesus showed up in Jerusalem opposed to Galilee, well, they were in Jerusalem. Jesus was crucified. Jesus told them to go to Galilee. Then they went to Galilee. Then they returned back to Jerusalem. and all of these align accurately with what the gospel accounts say.
Correct, because it's not a contradiction, because a contradiction can only exist if there's no possibility of an alternative, and a charitable analysis in philosophy is always one where you steel man.
Yeah, exactly.
Well done.
Yeah, exactly. So all these eyewitness accounts, they're accurate. It's just each person records what they saw and what was important to record, obviously with the direction of the Holy Spirit.
I thought I said that, but
you did, but apparently they didn't hear it.
It's been a long night.
Yeah.
And the last thing I want to mention is the whole morality thing. It's very interesting how they would say that, you don't need God for morals. Well, okay, then just live according to your subjective reality. Do whatever the heck you want. You can go out and have sex with as many women as possible. If you want to rape them as well, which I don't agree with, you can do that. But they don't do it. Why? Because their conscience rules against them. And because their conscience rules against them, that is proof of what you say, that the law comes from a moral lawgiver. What you were saying was right. I didn't hear it because maybe the demons are manifesting. I don't know, but that all it is to say is that if you live according to a subjective reality, you can, but people choose not to because their hearts yearn for eternity. And they've been given a moral law inside of their hearts that object to that subjective reality. They can say, oh, I'm afraid of jail time. Well, you're going to get your 3 meals a day. You're going to go outside sometimes. You can play basketball sometimes too. You lose nothing. You're still a human being at the end of the day. But if at the end, if there's nothing, you have nothing to fear. But they fear it anyways because inside they know. The only problem is a theological God. They have no issue with the concept of God. They just have a problem with a theological God. Exactly, a sky bully. But that's all I wanted to. That's all I wanted to mention. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, final question. Here it is. Thank you, Hope.
Yeah, my name is Ben. Frank, this I guess more directed towards you since you said you were raised Catholic in New Jersey. There's more to my Catholic brothers and sisters, but I know I was raised Protestant, a Baptist in the South, and so I just have one question, like where do we get the Apocrypha from? Where did Catholics get these books that supposedly Protestants removed from the canon that we get now, and like why did we do that supposedly?
It's the opposite, but Anna knows this.
Gotcha.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
I don't want you to feel like you were
No,
not.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
I just want to make
No.
sure. Because it's been a long night and he probably needs a break.
I agree.
Yeah. So the Apocrypha comes from the Second Temple period. It's a Jewish text, and it's specifically historical texts, and they're extremely valuable. The reason why they were removed was to do with Martin Luther for the most part. And it's because he knew that there were major problems with presenting a Bible in the common tongue to the people who hadn't read it in centuries, which is what he did, that's what he got in trouble for, while not teaching them hermeneutics. So he removed the historical books, which Roman Catholicism teaches is not the same as the Word of God. It's just extremely important to reference. Yeah, there's deuterocanonical books.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. Like Maccabees is fantastic for help with all of this stuff. But he removed them from the actual publishing of the Luther Bible to not confuse anybody. So now we just have an Old Testament and a New Testament, and Protestant traditions are based upon what Martin Luther did.
Okay, so they're not held in like the same authority as when we say like sola scriptura. They're not on that same level. It's more of just like extra biblical references.
Yes,
Would that be?
for example, 4th Maccabees has very problematic contradictions in it.
Okay.
We know, so do the Jews. Nobody is upset about this. This has been a problem for a while. We just look at it and go, no, we have documentation elsewhere. That was an accident. But it was never intended to be presented as the inspired word of God. That's not the point of those scriptures.
Yeah.
So when you go to seminary, for example, it's required you carry an Apocrypha because it's so helpful. They're historical texts.
Yeah, there's a couple other points I'd like to make on it, and that is Augustine thought the Apocrypha should be part of the Old Testament, and Jerome, about the same time, said no. So even the early church fathers didn't agree. And by the time you get to Luther, as Anna said, and then the Council of Trent, it's really the Council of Trent, which began in 1546 approximately, that where the Catholic Church officially added the Apocrypha to the Old Testament. What Anna's saying, they removed it from the publishing or from the
Protestant Reformation aspect of that.
Yeah.
That was just to make sure, and it wasn't against, nobody was actually upset with the removal of the Apocrypha. The problem was Luther had a problem with teaching that grace was a substance that was infused into you through the sacraments, because it's a reflection of Donatism, which was a heresy that everybody rejected. And so he went toe-to-toe on this issue. And the Council of Trent said anything that Martin Luther has been teaching is anathema, which means not just it's heretical, but anyone who affirms that grace is by faith is going to hell. And they've never reversed the Council of Trent, which is why Protestants and Roman Catholics can't commune well together. But I look forward to the next Pope, and hopefully he will.
Hopefully he'll be Catholic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just.
What do you think?
Yeah, maybe.
Possible?
Maybe.
Yeah, I asked that just because I had conversations with two self-prescribed Catholics yesterday, and like, just asking them basic questions like, "What's the gospel?" And all they gave me was like, "Jesus died on the cross," and I was like, "That's a great start, but there's so much more to it than that." You know, it's like you need more context. So like, I would love to talk to more Catholics about it because I'm not well versed in Catholicism. But yeah, thanks guys.
All right.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, she's local. So, Anna, tell them again when you guys meet.
Once again, student meetings are Wednesday evenings at 8 p.m. in the Campus House of Prayer, which is up in the fort. You need a code to get in, so you have to talk to us. You have to have a student ID to get in. If you are a professor, staff, or admin, those meetings are on Fridays at noon, same location.
That's for students only.
Students only. If you are a part of the public and you want to come, all you have to do is go to our community nights, which are local. Those will pick back up in the fall. They're once a month. You submit your questions and we go over them in live if it's a topic that a lot of people want to hear about. And then if it's not addressed, you can pick your personal question up in Q&A.